single lantern swings gently from the wooden arch of a saddle, casting rhythmic shadows across the cooling sand. The sun has slipped beneath the horizon of a boundless desert, leaving behind a sky stained in deep violet and bruised apricot. The air shifts, losing the fierce heat of the day, replaced by a crisp, profound stillness. All you can hear is the soft rhythm of breath, the muffled tread of wide hooves pressing into the earth, and the faint chiming of bronze bells carried on the wind. You're moving through a landscape that has watched empires rise and fade like shadows in the twilight. The air smells of crushed cardamom, dry earth, and the quiet promise of an approaching oasis. As we journey tonight across these ancient, windswept corridors of the world, let the motion carry you. You do not need to try to remember any of the scenes we pass, nor hold on to names or places. Let your mind soften, unclenching like a hand releasing a smooth stone into a quiet river. Let these ideas, these echoes of a beautiful past, drift effortlessly through your awareness. What stays with you will stay, and what fades will simply make room for rest. There is no test tomorrow, no destination you must hurry to reach. You're merely a passenger on a slow, continuous voyage through time, guided by the stars and the steady pace of the caravan. Let the heavy drape of the night sky wrap around you. Notice the millions of stars emerging, the very same stars that guided weary merchants and wandering poets thousands of years ago. They looked up at this identical, glittering canopy, finding solace in its vast, unchanging beauty. They knew that as long as the stars remained, they were never truly lost. Let that ancient comfort settle into your breathing, slow, deep, unhurried. You're safe on this journey. You're drifting along the arteries of human history, where every grain of sand holds a quiet memory, and every gust of wind carries a story of connection. It is a beautiful paradox that the path we're walking tonight, this legendary route that wove the edges of the world together, was never known as the Silk Road by the people who actually travelled it. The merchants who braved the mountain passes and scholars who crossed the desolate basins had no single name for the earth beneath their feet. They knew only the next well, the next ridge, the next sanctuary. The name itself is a whisper from a much later age, coined in 1877 by a German geographer named Ferdinand von Richthofen. He gave an elegant name to what was never a single ribbon of stone, but rather a vast, breathing web of trails and maritime routes. It was a nervous system of human curiosity, branching out like delicate leaf veins, shifting with the seasons and the drifting sands. Remembering this reminds us that grand narratives of history are often just many small, quiet footsteps woven together, people simply trying to reach the next horizon, unaware they are building a legend. The material that gave this sprawling network its name is as soft as the night air, yet strong enough to endure centuries. Silk. Its origin is wrapped in a story as delicate as the thread itself. The ancient Chinese legend speaks of the Empress Leizu sitting peacefully under the shade of a large mulberry tree on a warm afternoon. She was holding a small cup of hot, steaming tea. Suddenly, a pale cocoon dropped from the branches above, landing with a soft splash into her cup. As she reached in to retrieve it, the heat of the water began to loosen the cocoon, and she found herself pulling a shimmering, nearly invisible thread that seemed to go on forever. Whether born of this quiet moment or through generations of careful observation, the art of raising silkworms remained a fiercely guarded secret for thousands of years. The mere existence of silk, a fabric that caught the light like water, captivated the Roman Empire on the other side of the world, pulling east and west into an eternal embrace. And as shimmering bolts of silk moved westward, wrapped in protective canvas and leather, something invisible and equally beautiful moved eastward alongside them. It was the sound of the journey itself. The Silk Road was a conduit for melodies, a river of music flowing across continents. Imagine a cool evening by a campfire in a high mountain pass, where travellers from different lands shared the warmth of flames. Here, an instrument from the Middle East. The pear-shaped ode with its deep, resonant wooden belly was passed from hand to hand. As it travelled deeper into Central Asia and eventually into the heart of China, the instrument transformed. It adapted to the hands of new masters, shifting shape, gaining new frets, and evolving into the Chinese pipa. The four-stringed pipa, with bright cascading notes that sound like pearls dropping onto a jade plate, carries within its timbre the soul of the desert and craftsmanship of distant lands. To listen is to hear the blending of cultures, a reminder that humanity always shared its songs, long before sharing a common language. The campfires that warmed the musicians eventually burned down to embers, leaving the travellers to face the profound contrasts of the desert. The landscape of the Silk Road was one of extremes, from freezing mountain elevations to valleys that baked under the fierce midday sun. Yet, in the heart of ancient Persia, human ingenuity found a way to conquer the heat with absolute stillness and shadow. They built magnificent structures known as yakchals, massive domed ice houses rising from the arid earth like giant earthen beehives. These elegant buildings were masterpieces of ancient engineering, designed to capture the wind and utilize evaporative cooling. During freezing winter nights, water was channeled into shallow pools to freeze, and the ice was stored deep within subterranean chambers. The thick walls, made of a mortar composed of sand, clay, egg whites and goat hair, provided such perfect insulation that the ice remained completely frozen through scorching summer months. In the middle of a blazing desert, a weary traveller could be offered a bowl of chilled water, a miraculous gift of winter preserved in the heart of the sun. While ice melted and provided fleeting comfort, another invention carried along these routes offered a permanence that would reshape human memory forever. From the lush bamboo forests and mulberry groves of China came the secret of making paper. Before this, the world recorded its thoughts on heavy clay tablets, expensive animal skins, or brittle papyrus. But soaking and pressing plant fibres into thin, light, durable sheets changed the weight of knowledge. As paper making travelled westward, reaching the vibrant markets of Samarkand, paper became the new currency of the mind. It was lighter than silk and more valuable than gold to scholars who sought to map the stars, write the laws of medicine, and compose the poetry of their times. The gentle rustle of a turning page, a sound so common to us now, was once a revolutionary whisper moving across the steppes. Every time we drift to sleep with a book resting nearby, we are participating in a legacy that walked for thousands of miles across the spine of Asia. The messages written upon this paper often spoke of alliances, trade, and sometimes an intense desire for beauty and power. Chinese emperors of the Han dynasty read reports of magnificent creatures living in the distant mountainous region of Fergana. These were the heavenly horses, steeds of such breathtaking grace, speed and endurance that legends claim they sweated blood and were descended from dragons. The emperors believed these celestial horses were the only mounts capable of carrying a rider to the land of the immortals. The desire for these beautiful animals was so profound, it became a primary catalyst for extending the Great Wall and securing western trade routes. To picture one of these horses is to see a creature of pure poetry, lean, muscular, their coats gleaming like polished bronze, moving with fluid, effortless grace over rocky terrain. They were not just animals. They were living, breathing symbols of the boundless, uncatchable wind. These heavenly horses, carrying jade and royal decrees, would eventually need to rest. Along the edges of the unforgiving Taklamakan Desert, whose name translates as a place where one goes in but does not come out, nature provided sanctuaries of breathtaking beauty. One such refuge is the ancient oasis city of Dunhuang. Just south of the city lies a miracle of geology, the Crescent Moon Lake. Imagine a small, perfectly shaped arc of vibrant blue water, resting softly in the lap of towering golden sand dunes. For over 2,000 years, this fragile-looking pool has never dried up, and it has never been buried by shifting sands. It is protected by unique wind patterns, which sweep the sand upward rather than letting it cascade into the water. And these are no ordinary dunes, they are the singing sands. When the wind blows across the ridges, the friction of the grains produces a deep humming resonance, like the low, soothing tone of a distant cello. The landscape itself sings a lullaby to travellers resting by the sapphire water. The deep mesmerising blue of the crescent moon lake is mirrored by a stone carried through its markets, a treasure carved from the highest peaks of the earth, lapis lazuli. Deep in the remote badlands of modern-day Afghanistan, hidden within the jagged teeth of the Hindu Kush mountains, lies the Sarisang mine. For over 6,000 years, people have chipped away at the rock to extract this stone, looking exactly like a piece of the night sky, complete with glittering specks of golden pyrite resembling distant stars. The Silk Road carried these heavy celestial stones across deserts and oceans, all the way to the artist studios of Renaissance Europe. There, the stone was painstakingly ground into a fine powder to create the pigment known as ultramarine, literally meaning beyond the sea. It was the most expensive pigment in the world, more costly than gold, reserved only for painting the profound blue skies and robes of the divine in masterful frescoes. The tranquil blue that calms the eye today was born in the snowy silence of an Afghan peak, carried on the swaying back of a camel. To support the massive, slow-moving ecosystem that moved these stones, silks, and songs, a network of safe harbours was built along the harsh expanses of the route. These were the caravanserais, the grand, ancient inns of the Silk Road. Spaced roughly 20 miles apart, the exact distance a heavily laden camel caravan could comfortably walk in a single day, these formidable square fortresses offered sanctuary from bandits, storms, and the crushing isolation of the journey. Inside their thick, high walls lay a vast open courtyard, surrounded by arched alcoves. As evening fell, the heavy wooden gates were drawn shut, sealing out the dangers of the world. Inside, the courtyard transformed into a vibrant temporary village. Fires were lit, casting a warm glow on stone walls. The smell of roasting meats, baking bread, and brewing tea filled the air. Here, merchants from Venice, scholars from Persia, and monks from India sat shoulder to shoulder. They traded not just goods, but stories, philosophies, and quiet companionship before the embers died down and the camp succumbed to heavy, peaceful sleep. In those firelit courtyards, as stories were shared, so too was the food that sustained them. Among dried apricots, almonds, and flatbreads was a fruit so common to us now, we forget its wild, ancient origins, the apple. Every sweet, crisp apple you've ever eaten traces its deepest roots back to the dense, wild fruit forests of the Tian Shan, the heavenly mountains in Central Asia. In this remote wilderness, the ancestor of the domestic apple grew in an astonishing array of colours, sizes and flavours, from the tartness of a lemon to the deep sweetness of honey. As bears and wild horses ate the fruit, they spread the seeds locally. But it was the travellers of the Silk Road who took the apple to the rest of the world. A merchant would pluck an apple from a wild tree, pack it in his saddlebag, and eat it miles down the road, tossing the core onto the fertile soil of a new valley. Unwittingly, these nomadic traders became the greatest gardeners in history, planting orchards across continents simply by enjoying a crisp bite of fruit on a quiet journey. As those discarded apple seeds took root in the fertile soil of new valleys, growing into silent, blossoming orchards, they became living monuments to the journey. But not every treasure carried along these ancient arteries was born from the earth or grown in the sun. Some of the most wondrous objects were forged in fire shaped by human breath, and possessed a fragility that made their survival across thousands of miles feel almost miraculous. From the roaring furnaces of the Roman Empire came blown glass. In the eastern reaches of the world, where artisans had already mastered the heavy, cool perfection of carved jade and the dense resonance of bronze, this Roman glass was viewed as a breathtaking anomaly. It was a material that seemed to hold frozen water within its form. goblets of translucent cobalt blue, vials of pale seafoam green, and bowls so thin they felt like hardened air were carefully wrapped in thick layers of wool and nested inside wooden crates. For a glass vessel to survive the jostling of a camel's gait across the frozen passes of the Pamir Mountains and the searing heat of the Taklamakan Desert was a testament to the supreme care of the caravan masters. When this glass finally reached the courts of Chinese emperors, it was prized more highly than gold, revered for its ability to capture and bend the ambient light of a flickering lamp, casting distorted liquid shadows across the quiet walls of a room. Where the soft light of an oil lamp fell upon a table in a resting caravanserai, it often illuminated another quiet exchange, one that required no spoken language to understand. Through the trade routes moved the ancestors of the board games we play today, mirroring the grand movements of empires on a miniature, intimate scale. From the lush valleys of India came Chaturanga, a game of strategy played on a checkered grid, which slowly evolved as it passed through the hands of Persian scholars and Arab merchants into the game of chess. Imagine two travellers from entirely different worlds, sitting cross-legged on a woven rug. They share no common vocabulary, but they share the silent, universal rules of the board. The heavy carved pieces of polished bone, dark walnut and pale ivory are moved with slow, deliberate grace. The clack of wood against wood is the only sound in the shared stillness. The geometry of the board, a perfect grid of alternating shadows and light, provided a space of order in a world of wild, unpredictable landscapes. Just as the players sat in this quiet, undisturbed contemplation, let your own thoughts settle into that same steady rhythm. There is no rush to move, no urgency in the mind. You're exactly where you need to be, safe within the architecture of the night. The grid of the chessboard represented a world of pure, calculated mathematics, and it was along these same dusty roads that the most profound mathematical revolution in human history quietly travelled. It was the transmission of a concept so simple, yet so unimaginably powerful, that it altered the fabric of human understanding, the concept of zero. Born in the philosophical depths of ancient India as shunya, meaning a state of emptiness or the void, this idea was carried westward by Arab merchants and mathematicians. Before zero, counting systems like Roman numerals were incredibly cumbersome, lacking a way to signify an empty space in a column of numbers. The idea that nothing could be quantified, that a simple hollow circle or a single dark dot inked onto a piece of birch bark could hold a place and multiply a number's value, was a conceptual masterpiece. It was a recognition that emptiness is not simply an absence, but a profound presence in its own right. The beauty of the void allowed humanity to calculate the vast distances between the stars and to understand the microscopic building blocks of life. It is a gentle reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing we can possess is an empty space, a quiet void where new possibilities are allowed to form. From the quiet, conceptual beauty of the void, we drift toward an invisible richness that filled the air of the caravan routes. It was a cargo that held no weight and cast no shadow, the profound power of scent. In the lush, walled gardens of ancient Persia, botanists cultivated the exquisite damask rose, a flower with a fragrance so deep and intoxicating it felt like velvet against the senses. But flowers wither and fade on long journeys. To capture this ephemeral beauty, Persian alchemists perfected the art of distillation. Long before dawn, while the world was still bathed in heavy silver dew, thousands of delicate pink petals were gathered by hand. They were placed into large copper alembics, heated slowly over low fires until the steam rose, carrying the essential oils of the flower into a cooling chamber where it condensed into pure, fragrant rosewater. This liquid gold was sealed tightly in small, elegant glass flasks and carried across the world. When a wealthy merchant in a distant city opened the vial, the scent of a Persian spring was instantly released into the dry desert air. A few drops sprinkled on the hands of an arriving guest offered instant refreshment and a sense of profound luxury. Scent is the most ancient memory, a ghostly bridge that connects the mind directly to a distant time and place without a single word being spoken. While scent evaporated into the warm evening air, a desire to capture permanence drove others deep into the earth. At the edge of the singing sand dunes of Dunhuang, where the desert winds howl across barren rock, lies a sanctuary of unimaginable stillness, the Mogao Caves. Known as the Caves of the Thousand Buddhas, this site began in the 4th century when a single monk, inspired by a vision of golden light, carved a small meditation cell into the sheer cliff face. Over the next millennium, hundreds of caves were carved into the living rock by travellers giving thanks for a safe desert crossing. Inside these cool, echoing chambers, artists painted magnificent, sprawling frescoes illuminated only by the faint glow of oil lamps. They ground precious minerals to create vibrant pigments, malachite for deep forest greens, cinnabar for striking reds, and lapis lazuli for the endless celestial blues. Because the desert air was so incredibly dry, these delicate paintings and the serene clay statue sitting peacefully within them survived for centuries in perfect, undisturbed darkness. As we drift deeper into this cavern of history, notice the weight of your own body resting, the muscles smoothing out, the tension melting away. The mind can simply paint its own quiet, protective landscapes behind closed eyelids, safe from the winds of the waking world. The vibrant walls of the Mogao Caves were covered in grand universal narratives, but the roads outside carried stories of a much smaller, deeply intimate scale. The true engines of the Silk Road were not always emperors and generals, but the Sogdians, an ancient, remarkably resilient people from Central Asia who became the master merchants of the world. Their language became the universal tongue of trade, and in their saddlebags, alongside jade and spices, they carried fragile folded pieces of paper that remind us how little human emotion has changed over the millennia. In a ruined watchtower along the Great Wall, modern archaeologists discovered a perfectly preserved mailbag containing the Sogdian ancient letters. Written in the early 4th century, these letters never reached their destinations. They were penned by merchants writing to their business partners, and more poignantly, by a woman named Mune, writing to the husband who had left her in a distant trading post. Through the elegant, flowing strokes of a reed pen, she expressed her frustration, her loneliness, and her deep longing for home. To hold one of these letters is to touch the very heartbeat of the past. The crisp, dry paper holds the timeless ache of distance, proving that beneath the grand sweep of history there were always simple, quiet lives, full of the same loves and worries we carry today. To pay for the transport of such precious personal cargo, travellers utilised a currency that appealed not to the desire for gold, but to the simple, universal need for warmth and comfort. Silver and copper coins were heavy, and their value fluctuated wildly between empires, but everyone understood the restorative value of a warm drink. This led to the creation of tea bricks. In the damp, misty mountains of southwestern China, leaves from ancient tea trees were harvested, fermented and steamed until soft. They were then pressed into dense, heavy moulds, often mixed with a binding agent like rice water, and stamped with intricate geometric patterns or the seal of a specific trading house. Once dried, these dark, earthy blocks were as hard as stone. They were the perfect currency, impervious to the elements, easy to stack, and universally desired. When a caravan stopped for the night, a traveller could carefully break off a small corner of the brick, tossing it into a copper kettle of boiling water over a campfire. The tight leaves would slowly unfurl, releasing the deep, woody aroma of the forest into the cold mountain air. The heat of the water turned a solid block of commerce back into a soothing liquid comfort, warming the hands and settling the stomach before a long, restful sleep. The methodical process of pressing these tea leaves into solid, repetitive shapes found a beautiful echo in a far more profound technology that would forever alter the landscape of human thought: woodblock printing. Long before the mechanical printing presses of Europe clattered to life, the artisans of the East were carving entire pages of text in reverse into smooth, heavy blocks of pear and jujube wood. It was a meditative, intensely deliberate craft. The wood was brushed with a rich, dark ink made from the soot of burned pine wood mixed with animal glue. A delicate sheet of paper was laid over the block, and a soft brush was rubbed gently across the back, transferring the characters with perfect, crisp precision. This repetitive, rhythmic pressing allowed for the multiplication of knowledge on a scale the world had never seen. From this process came the Diamond Sutra, printed in the year 868, making it the oldest complete, dated, printed book in the world. It was a sacred text exploring the illusion of the material world, and remarkably, its final lines declare that it was created for universal free distribution. Let the quiet repetition of these ancient tasks soothe you. Like the steady, gentle press of ink to paper, let your breath form a slow, rhythmic pattern, in and out, peaceful, continuous, and deeply grounded. This brilliant multiplication of knowledge allowed complex maps and astronomical charts to spread across the continents, but to navigate the vast, featureless oceans of sand and the terrifying open expanses of the sea, travellers required a different kind of guide. They needed a tool that could see the invisible architecture of the earth. In ancient China, scholars experimenting with divination discovered that a naturally magnetized mineral, called a lodestone, possessed a mysterious, unyielding desire to align itself with the poles of the earth. They carved this heavy, dark stone into the shape of a small spoon, its handle tapering to a fine point. When placed upon a smooth, perfectly polished bronze plate etched with directional symbols, the heavy stone spoon would rotate silently, seemingly by magic, until its handle pointed perfectly south. There was no mechanical gear turning it, no wind pushing it, only the silent, invisible magnetic field of the planet exerting its quiet pull. For a traveller lost in the blinding whiteout of a snowstorm or navigating a ship under a heavy starless sky, this silent pointing stone was a miracle. It was a piece of the earth communicating with the rest of the earth, providing a true and unwavering direction when all other landmarks had vanished into the mist. Yet, while the invisible lines of magnetism guided the needle, it was flesh, bone, and breathtaking endurance that actually carried the world upon its back. The true hero of the Silk Road was a biological masterpiece, a creature perfectly sculpted by nature for the impossible journey, the Bactrian camel. Unlike their single-humped cousins of the Arabian desert, the Bactrian camels possessed two thick, towering humps, which did not hold water, but rather 80 pounds of nutrient-rich fat, allowing them to walk for weeks without food in desolate landscapes. They were armoured for extremes. In the freezing high-altitude winters, they grew a thick, shaggy coat of heavy wool, which they would dramatically shed as they descended into the scorching summer basins. Their eyes were shielded from whipping sandstorms by double rows of long, thick eyelashes, and their nostrils could close tightly to seal out the dust. Their wide, padded feet functioned like snowshoes, preventing them from sinking into the shifting dunes. They moved with a slow, hypnotic, swaying gait, a steady rocking motion that mirrored the rhythm of a ship rolling over gentle ocean waves. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the desert floor in shades of indigo and ash, the only sound was the heavy rhythmic thud of their footfalls and the soft metallic chime of a bronze bell hung around the lead camel's neck. The sound of that bell swinging in the dark, a gentle, repetitive tolling, is a promise of safe passage through the deep, velvety expanse of the night, leading us slowly toward the next distant glowing horizon. But to know which horizon to chase beneath that sprawling velvet canopy, the mind reached up to pluck the stars themselves and hold them in the palm of a hand. This was the magic of the astrolabe. Crafted from heavy polished brass, it was an intricate instrument that served as a portable two-dimensional model of the universe. Its design was layered with beautifully etched metal plates, the topmost piece, called the wrist, cut away to resemble a delicate golden spiderweb with fine, curving points that represented the brightest stars in the night sky. By holding the heavy brass ring at the top and letting the instrument hang perfectly plumb, a traveller could align a rotating bar with the North Star, instantly calculating the time of night, the latitude of their camp, and the shifting of the seasons. It was a remarkable fusion of Greek mathematics, Persian engineering, and Islamic artistry, passed from hand to hand across the long roads. To hold an astrolabe was to hold a quiet certainty. The heavens above might seem overwhelmingly vast and untouchable, but within the intricate etchings of this small, cool metal disc, the chaotic cosmos was organised into a perfect, predictable harmony. From the grand, slow-turning mechanics of the starry sky, we lower our gaze to the parched, cracked earth of the Turpan Basin. Here, in one of the lowest and hottest depressions on the planet, an invisible miracle was flowing just beneath the traveller's feet. To survive the blistering summer heat, ancient engineers carved the Carez, a staggering network of subterranean water channels. They began at the base of the snow-capped heavenly mountains, digging deep vertical shafts into the rock, then connecting them with horizontal tunnels that ran for dozens, sometimes hundreds, of miles beneath the desert floor. Because the water flowed in absolute darkness, shielded entirely from the fierce evaporating rays of the sun, it remained icy and pure. Imagine standing in a sun-baked desert, the air shimmering with heat, and stepping down a flight of cool stone stairs into a dim, quiet sanctuary where an underground river gently murmurs. This hidden water transformed deathly arid basins into lush, green oases, proving that even in the most unforgiving environments, life finds a way to flow just beneath the surface. As you visualize this cool, dark water moving steadily through the earth, allow the muscles in your own face to soften. Let the jaw release. Feel a wave of cool, liquid relaxation wash over the tension in your shoulders, carrying it away into the quiet dark. Where that subterranean water finally surfaced, it kissed the roots of blossoming orchards, bringing forth colours that defied the monochrome desert. Among the heavy, drooping branches grew a fruit that seemed to hide the very essence of a sunset within its leathery rind, the pomegranate. Native to the ancient region of Persia, this heavy crimson sphere was carried eastward along the Silk Road, finding a welcoming new home in the soils of China. When a traveller broke open the tough protective skin of the pomegranate, they did not find typical fruit flesh, but hundreds of brilliant translucent red seeds, clustered together like raw, uncut rubies catching the light. To the merchants and kings who traded them, these tightly packed seeds became a universal symbol of abundance, fertility, and the deep, hidden richness of the earth. The fruit was so revered that its bulbous, crowned silhouette was woven into royal tapestries, carved into the stone facades of temples, and painted onto the sides of delicate ceramics. It is a quiet reminder that the most profound beauty is often protected by a rough exterior, waiting patiently to be opened and appreciated. If the ruby-red seeds of the pomegranate were the heavy jewels of the oasis garden, another botanical treasure carried a value far exceeding its delicate, almost weightless form: saffron. Originating in the sun-drenched fields of the Mediterranean and Persia, this legendary spice is born from the centre of the violet crocus flower. For merely a few weeks each autumn, the fields would explode into a sea of soft purple. Within each flower rested exactly 3 vivid crimson threads, the stigmas. Because these threads are so unimaginably fragile, they could only be harvested by hand, plucked gently in the quiet, misty hours just before dawn, before the rising sun could wilt their potency. It takes over 70,000 individual flowers to produce just 1 single pound of dried saffron. Packed into small, airtight cedar boxes, these fiery threads travelled thousands of miles, carrying with them an intoxicating, earthy aroma and the power to dye the robes of monks and emperors a brilliant, luminescent gold. The sheer effort required to gather such a tiny amount of beauty is staggering, yet it teaches us the value of absolute patience. Great things are often gathered not by force, but by 1,000 small, gentle, deliberate actions. The desire to infuse the world with such vivid colour eventually led to a marriage of earth and fire that would define the aesthetic of an entire era. Deep in the rugged mountains of Persia, miners extracted ores rich in cobalt, a mineral that, when ground into a fine powder, yielded an impossibly deep, mesmerising blue. For centuries this powder was used locally, but when the Silk Road brought this Persian cobalt into the hands of Chinese master potters, magic occurred. The artisans painted the dark pigment onto vessels shaped from pure white kaolin clay. When placed into the roaring heat of a dragon kiln, the dull, ashen pigment transformed into a brilliant glassy sapphire, forever fused beneath a clear, smooth glaze. This was the birth of iconic blue and white porcelain. The contrast was breathtaking, the pristine, snowy white representing the purity of the sky, and the deep, flowing blue capturing the depth of the ocean. These smooth, cool vases and bowls were packed in straw and carried back across the very roads the cobalt had travelled, becoming the most coveted objects in the world. Feel the smooth, cool perfection of that porcelain in your mind's eye. Smooth, cool, and perfectly still. The mind, too, can be just as clear, just as unblemished by the dust of the day. As the heat of the porcelain kilns faded into the evening and the bustling markets grew quiet, the light of a simple oil lamp became a medium for a different kind of magic. In the resting camps and the courtyards of the caravanserais, travellers gathered to watch the dance of shadow puppetry. This ancient art form, utilising the stark contrast of light and dark, spread seamlessly across the trade routes, from the villages of India and China all the way to the tea houses of the Ottoman Empire. Artisans meticulously cut figures from thin, translucent donkey or sheep leather, treating the hides until they were thin enough to let light bleed through, then painting them with vibrant jewel-toned dyes. When held against a taut white cloth screen illuminated from behind by a flickering flame, these flat leather cutouts sprang into glorious animated life. The shadows were not just black silhouettes, but glowing coloured spirits telling epic tales of heroes, dragons, and wandering scholars. The audience sat in the dark, entranced by the illusion, their imaginations filling in the vast landscape surrounding the small figures. It is a gentle truth that we do not need to see every detail to understand a story. Sometimes, a simple shadow cast against the light is enough to carry us into a deeply comforting dream. While the translucent figures danced across the glowing screen, a traveller might sit quietly in the audience, cracking open a small hard shell that held the memory of an ancient distant forest, the walnut. Native to the mountainous regions of Central Asia, where massive wild walnut groves blanketed the slopes in deep shade, this remarkable nut was a perfect food for the endless road. Encased in a thick green husk that dried into a tough woody armour, it could survive months of travel without spoiling. When a merchant cracked the shell, the nut inside revealed a shape remarkably like a miniature human brain, with its two undulating halves connected in the centre. Because of this, ancient scholars and physicians believed the walnut held the power to nourish the mind and enhance wisdom. As they tossed the empty shells to the ground, they unknowingly seeded the trade routes, bringing these majestic, wide-canopied shade trees into the gardens of the Mediterranean and the courtyards of the East. Within every small, tightly closed shell lies the blueprint for a towering tree, waiting only for time and earth to unfold its potential. The high, freezing mountain passes where those wild walnut trees first clung to the rocky soil were unforgiving, characterized by thin air and howling glacial winds. Yet, from this harsh, jagged environment came a material softer than a breath of warm air, Kashmir. In the desolate, sweeping altitudes of the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, nomadic herders tended to the Changtangi goat. To survive the brutal sub-zero winters, these resilient animals grew a coarse outer coat of hair, but beneath it, pressed close to their skin, they developed an undercoat of unimaginably fine, downy fibres. When spring arrived and the ice began to thaw, the goats would naturally shed this protective layer. Rather than shearing the animals, herders would patiently and gently comb the goats, gathering the wispy, cloud-like down caught in the brush. This raw fibre was spun into threads so delicate they seemed to dissolve when touched, then woven into shawls of profound warmth and weightlessness. A true pashmina shawl could be drawn entirely through the centre of a small ring. The knowledge that such exquisite, comforting softness is born from the most freezing, abrasive conditions offers a quiet comfort. Even in the coldest seasons of life, something deeply protective and warm is quietly forming. Just as that warmth insulates the body, allow your breathing to insulate your mind. Soft, continuous, and steady. There is nothing to hold on to, nothing to solve, just the gentle rise and fall of the chest, the fierce, invisible winds that swept across those high plateaus, demanding such warm garments, were also harnessed by human ingenuity for pure, unburdened joy. The Silk Road carried not only heavy cargo, but the light, fluttering magic of the kite. Born in China over 2,000 years ago, the first kites were crafted from two materials readily available and perfectly suited for the sky: resilient bamboo and lightweight silk. Originally designed for practical purposes, such as measuring distances, testing the wind, or sending signalling flags across vast military camps, the kite soon evolved into an instrument of art and play. Elaborate shapes of swallows, dragons, and butterflies were painted onto the silk. Some were even fitted with small, specialized bamboo whistles that caught the wind, producing a continuous, hauntingly beautiful hum as they hovered high above the earth. As the knowledge of kite-making drifted westward along the trade routes, it brought with it the simple, universal pleasure of standing firmly on the ground while a piece of your spirit dances in the clouds. To hold the string of a kite is to feel the pulse of the sky, a gentle tug from the atmosphere itself, reminding us that we are connected to the vast, invisible currents of the world. Far below the soaring kites, hidden deep within the icy, rushing rivers of the Kunlun Mountains, lay a treasure that did not float on the wind, but sank heavily into the quiet depths, the nephrite jade of Khotan. This remote oasis kingdom, located on the southern edge of the Taklamakan Desert, was the source of a stone more precious to the ancient Chinese than any amount of gold or silver. The most coveted variety was known as mutton fat jade, a pure, creamy white stone, so incredibly dense and smooth that to touch it felt like touching cool, hardened liquid. For thousands of years, miners would wade into the freezing glacial meltwaters of the White Jade River, feeling blindly with their bare feet for the smooth, heavy boulders that had been polished by the river's current for centuries. These raw stones were carried eastward, where master carvers spent years, sometimes entire lifetimes, using abrasive sand to slowly wear away the surface, revealing the luminous, hidden shapes within. Jade was believed to hold the essence of heaven and earth, a stone of immortality and absolute purity. The cool, dense weight of a polished jade amulet resting against the skin was thought to absorb the body's heat and calm the spirit. Let that imaginary coolness rest over your own eyes now, a heavy, soothing stillness anchoring you safely to the earth, preparing the body for the deepest, most tranquil hours of the night. As that imagined jade rests gently against you, its perfect, cool sphere might slowly transform in your mind's eye into something born not from the crushing weight of mountains, but from the silent, rhythmic embrace of the sea. While the overland caravans trudged through dry, blowing dust, a vast maritime silk road was simultaneously breathing life into the warm ports of the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Here, Beneath the rolling heavy waves existed a treasure that required no carving, no polishing, and no fire to perfect: the natural pearl. Deep in the turquoise waters, freediving gatherers would hold their breath for minutes at a time, descending into the quiet blue twilight to retrieve oyster shells from the sandy floor. Inside, a rare few lay a sphere of pure nacre, built layer upon microscopic layer over many years, capturing the iridescence of moonlight upon water. Unlike gemstones that must be violently cut to reveal their brilliance, a pearl emerges entirely complete, offering a soft inner luminescence that seems to glow from within. It was the only precious cargo of the ancient world created by a living creature, a tiny, perfect moon cultivated in the gentle darkness of the ocean, carried on wooden dhows across the seas to adorn the crowns of distant empires. The flawless geometry of the pearl, a shape with no beginning and no end, finds a resonant echo in the heavy, hemispherical shapes carried over the high, snow-dusted passes of the Himalayas. These were the singing bowls of Tibet and Nepal, crafted not from ocean shells, but from a precise ancient alloy of 7 different metals, including copper, tin, iron, and traces of silver and gold. These bowls were traded heavily by wandering monks and nomadic merchants. They were not designed to hold water or grain, but to hold sound. When a wooden mallet was drawn slowly around the thick metal rim of the bowl, the friction coaxed the alloy into an astonishing acoustic vibration. A deep, rich, continuous hum would rise from the bronze, filling the thin mountain air with overlapping harmonic overtones. This sound was not merely musical. The specific frequencies produced by these bowls have been shown to naturally guide human brainwaves into states of deep relaxation and meditation. As you imagine that low, resonant hum expanding into the space around you, let your own thoughts synchronize with its steady, unbroken wave. You can allow the heavy muscles of your neck and shoulders to completely surrender their effort, melting downward as the lingering tone softly fades into the quiet. As the deep vibration of the bronze dissipates, it leaves behind a profound stillness that heightens the other senses, inviting in the subtle, invisible cargoes of the air. Among the most coveted of these was a fragrance that speaks directly of warmth, safety, and comfort: true cinnamon. Long before it became a commonplace comfort in our homes, cinnamon was a luxurious enigma, traded in absolute secret across the sprawling maritime and overland routes. It begins its life in the lush emerald forests of Sri Lanka and southern India, beneath the canopy of a tropical evergreen tree. Harvesters would carefully peel away the rough outer bark to reach the delicate, fragrant inner bark beneath. As these thin, damp strips were laid out in the warm sun to dry, they would naturally curl inward upon themselves, forming perfect hollow quills resembling fragile scrolls of ancient parchment. To protect their incredibly lucrative monopoly, the merchants who transported these quills across the deserts fabricated wild, mythological tales for their buyers, claiming the spice was gathered from the nests of giant, terrifying birds perched on sheer cliffs. The truth, however, is far more grounding. That deep, sweet, earthy aroma, capable of instantly making a strange room feel like a sanctuary, is simply the protective layer of a quiet forest tree, freely offering its warmth to the world. The warm, rust-coloured hues of those dried cinnamon quills perfectly anticipate the breathtaking palette of the earth itself, specifically along the historic Hexi corridor in northwestern China. Here, weary travellers leading their camels through the arid monochromatic landscapes of the Gansu province would suddenly find themselves flanked by a terrain that defied all logic and expectation. The Jangye-Dangxia landform, often called the Rainbow Mountains. Over 24 million years, vast layers of red sandstone and various heavy mineral deposits were laid down on the floor of an ancient ocean. As tectonic plates slowly collided, the earth buckled and folded, thrusting these horizontal layers upward into towering, jagged peaks. Wind and rain meticulously sculpted the rock into smooth, flowing curves, revealing vivid, undulating stripes of deep magenta, saffron yellow, forest green, and startling cerulean blue. To walk through this geological masterpiece at sunrise or sunset, when the angled light sets the mineral stripes ablaze, is to feel as though you are moving through a colossal, three-dimensional painting. The sheer, overwhelming scale of these coloured mountains reminds us that the Earth operates on a timeline of unimaginable patience, spending millions of years quietly layering its colours just to create a single, breathtaking canvas for those lucky enough to pass by. To take in the sweeping grandeur of the Rainbow Mountains requires looking outward at the vastness of the world, but the Silk Road also nurtured the ability to look closely, to examine the profound beauty of the miniature. In the scholarly centres of the Abbasid Caliphate, where ancient texts were being painstakingly translated into Arabic by candlelight, philosophers and mathematicians wrestled with the delicate behaviour of light. From this intense study came the creation of the reading stone, the earliest ancestor of the magnifying glass. Artisans took clear beryl or rock crystal, a heavy, perfectly translucent quartz, and polished it into a precise hemispherical dome. When a scholar placed this cool, heavy dome directly onto a parchment page, the curved surface bent the ambient light, instantly expanding the tiny, delicate calligraphy beneath it. It was a miraculous technology for aging monks and scribes whose eyesight had faded in the dim, flickering light of oil lamps. A simple piece of polished earth possessed the power to restore absolute clarity to a blurred world. Think of that solid, clarifying stillness now. If your mind feels crowded by the blurred, racing details of the waking day, you can place a gentle, quiet lens over your thoughts. Let the background soften and blur away, leaving only the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing in perfect, crystal-clear focus. The cool, glassy surface of the reading stone offers a striking textural contrast to another treasure moving westward, one wrapped in a delicate, velvety softness. The peach, this incredibly fragile, juicy fruit, first took root in the fertile, misty river valleys of ancient China, where it was celebrated as a sacred symbol of longevity, immortality, and the warm arrival of spring. As merchant caravans packed the sweet, dried halves of the fruit and carefully carried the hard, deeply grooved pits across the perilous mountain passes, the peach tree found rich new soil to call home in the terraced gardens of Persia. When the fruit eventually reached the expanding borders of the Roman Empire, the Romans, dazzled by its soft, blushing skin and intoxicating fragrance, named it the Malum persicum, the Persian apple. They had no idea that the fruit had already travelled for thousands of miles across an entire continent before reaching their hands. The long journey of the peach is a beautiful testament to the resilience of a simple seed. It reveals that something incredibly delicate, soft and sweet can survive the harshest deserts and the coldest altitudes, provided it is planted with care and given a chance to see the sun in a new valley. As the sweet juice of a peach drips from a traveller's fingers, the slow, steady fall of water was being harnessed to solve one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient journey, the accurate measurement of time. While the blazing sun guided the caravans by day, the vast star-strewn nights required a different kind of compass. In the bustling courtyards of the caravanserais and the quiet chambers of astronomers, time was kept by the clepsydra, or water clock. These elegant devices utilised the reliable, unchanging force of gravity. A large, ornate copper or bronze vessel was filled with fresh water, which was allowed to escape through a tiny, perfectly calibrated hole at the base. As the water level slowly sank, it revealed distinct marks etched into the inside of the bowl, silently counting the passing hours of the night guard. Unlike the frantic, anxious ticking of modern mechanical clocks, the ancient water clock measured the progression of time with a soothing liquid rhythm, a slow, gentle drip, a natural release. It is a deeply peaceful way to understand time, not as a dwindling resource to be chased and caught, but as a quiet, steady flow that naturally carries us forward, washing away the remnants of yesterday. This gentle passage of time, marked drop by liquid drop, is witnessed on a grand, almost eternal scale by a living entity that travelled alongside the merchants and monks, the ginkgo biloba tree. Often referred to as a living fossil, the ginkgo is a botanical marvel, belonging to a lineage that survived the extinction of the dinosaurs, completely unchanged for over 200 million years. As travellers walked the Silk Road, carrying sacred texts and quiet philosophers, they also carried the silvery nut-like seeds of the ginkgo, planting them carefully in the quiet, meditative courtyards of their new temples. These trees possess a breathtaking resilience, immune to most diseases and capable of living for thousands of years in quiet observation. But their true magic reveals itself in late autumn. Over a few short days, the tree's unique fan-shaped leaves transition from a deep emerald green into a staggering, brilliant, luminescent gold. When the autumn wind blows, the tree releases its leaves all at once, creating a sudden, magnificent carpet of gold upon the earth. To rest beneath a ginkgo tree is to sit under a canopy of prehistoric resilience, a quiet guardian of the world that knows no rush, moving only to the deep, slow, majestic rhythms of the changing seasons. The brilliant golden yellow of the fallen ginkgo leaves was a colour ancient dyers desperately wanted to capture and apply to the bolts of silk and mounds of sheep's wool moving along the trade routes. Yet, extracting a colour from nature is only half the battle. Ensuring that colour does not fade under the brutal desert sun or wash away in a mountain storm requires an invisible magic. This magic came in the form of a seemingly mundane, crystalline mineral salt known as alum. Mined in the remote, arid landscapes of Egypt, Anatolia and Western China, alum was one of the most vital yet unsung commodities of the entire Silk Road. It acted as a mordant, a chemical bridge that bound the brilliant organic dyes extracted from roots, insects and flowers permanently to the fibres of a cloth. Without this humble, translucent salt, the breathtaking, vivid reds of Persian carpets and the deep imperial blues of Han Dynasty silks would have simply vanished into a pale, washed-out grey after a single rainstorm. Alum teaches us a beautiful, hidden truth about endurance. Sometimes the most crucial element holding a magnificent masterpiece together is completely invisible to the eye, working quietly beneath the surface to ensure the beauty remains completely intact. While brightly dyed silks represented the fragile, fleeting luxury of the settled empires, the sprawling, windswept steppes of Central Asia demanded a fabric of absolute, impenetrable resilience. This harsh landscape gave birth to the oldest known textile in human history, a material that was never woven on a loom: felt. The nomadic herders of the steppes discovered that by layering the raw, shorn wool of their sheep, soaking it in hot water, and then repeatedly rolling and pressing it with immense physical pressure, the microscopic scales on the wool fibres would lock together permanently. This created a dense, thick, highly insulating fabric that was entirely windproof and naturally water-resistant. Large, heavy sheets of this white wool felt were draped over intricate, collapsible wooden lattices to form the iconic dwelling of the nomads, the yurt or jur. These remarkable structures were architectural marvels perfectly adapted to an environment of constant motion and fierce, howling winds. Their circular shape provided no flat walls or hard corners for the gale-force storms to catch, allowing the wind to simply wrap around the home and slip away harmlessly into the dark. Deep inside the yurt, the thick felt walls absorbed the sound of the world outside, creating a heavy, muffled cocoon of warmth and safety. Imagine resting inside such a space now, surrounded by thick, protective walls, where the harsh, freezing winds of the outside world are reduced to a distant, gentle whisper, leaving you completely secure, perfectly warm, and floating deeper into peace. This profound sense of sanctuary, built to withstand the harshest storms of the steppe, finds a striking vertical contrast in the settled oasis cities of the desert. In the ancient heart of Bukhara, Rising from the dusty earth like a massive, intricately carved pillar of baked clay, stands the Kalyan minaret. Built in the 12th century, this staggering tower reaches over 150 feet into the cloudless sky. It is completely covered in 14 distinct bands of geometric brickwork, each layer featuring a different mesmerizing pattern of shadows and fired earth. The minaret was so breathtakingly tall and undeniably beautiful that when the fearsome armies of Genghis Khan swept across Central Asia, levelling entire empires to ash, the Great Khan supposedly stood at its base, looked up at the intricate brickwork, and ordered that this single structure be spared. It was the only building in the city to survive the siege intact. There is a quiet, profound comfort in knowing that even in eras of immense upheaval, pure, deliberate beauty possesses its own invisible armour. A masterpiece of human hands can command awe simply by standing tall and letting the light fall across its surface. Let your mind trace those repeating geometric bands of brick, circling higher and higher into the peaceful sky, carrying your thoughts away from the heavy ground. From that staggering sun-baked height, the eye naturally descends back to the fertile shaded earth below. In the bustling markets resting in the shadow of such towers, travellers sought an entirely different kind of masterpiece, one born not of clay, but of water, soil, and blinding sunlight, the hammy melon. Cultivated in the sweltering Turpan depression, where the blistering heat of the long day was perfectly balanced by the freezing chill of the night, these melons developed an extraordinary, concentrated sweetness. Their tough, pale yellow rinds were deeply netted with rough, raised lines, resembling the wrinkled maps of the very roads the caravans travelled. But when a merchant sliced through that rugged exterior with a curved iron blade, the pale, crisp orange flesh inside was a revelation. It was so incredibly hydrating, sweet and fragrant that the emperors of the Qing dynasty later demanded these melons be sent to the Forbidden City as a royal tribute. Entire caravans were organised for the sole purpose of transporting this fleeting, juicy perfection across the desert before it spoiled. To taste a slice of this melon in the middle of a parched basin was to taste a miracle of survival. It is a gentle reminder that the harshest, most extreme environments often produce the sweetest, most life-affirming rewards. As you imagine the cool, refreshing sweetness of that desert fruit, notice how the body naturally responds to the thought of relief. The jaw relaxes, the shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, melting into whatever is supporting you. You do not need to hold on to any tension. Just let the gentle current of these ancient stories carry you forward, effortlessly. While the sweet juice of the melon quenched the body's thirst, the incredible thirst of the world's markets for luxury was quenched by a complex rhythmic machinery hidden behind the wooden doors of Chinese workshops, the draw loom. Before this remarkable wooden apparatus was perfected, the weaving of intricate patterned silks was a maddeningly slow, meticulous process. The draw loom changed the pace of creation forever. It was a massive skeletal framework of bamboo and polished timber, requiring two artisans to operate in perfect synchronized harmony. One weaver sat high atop the loom, a position known as the draw boy, pulling specific bundles of fine silk threads to raise the warp, while the master weaver sat below, passing the wooden shuttle back and forth with a rhythmic, hypnotic clack. This complex binary code of lifting and lowering threads allowed them to weave repeating magnificent patterns of dragons, lotus flowers, and sweeping clouds directly into the fabric. It was, in essence, the world's very first computer program, written not in ones and zeros but in crimson and gold silk. The steady, repetitive sound of the wooden shuttle flying through the threads was the heartbeat of the Silk Road, a soothing mechanical lullaby that slowly, deliberately wove the edges of the world together. The magnificent silks that fell from these wooden looms were often traded for heavy silver, but they were also bartered for something entirely unexpected, a dense, knobby root pulled directly from the cold alpine earth, rhubarb. While we might picture rhubarb as a tart crimson stalk baked into warm spring dishes, the ancient world prized a different part of the plant entirely, and for a vastly different reason. In the high, freezing mountains of Tibet and western China, foragers dug up the massive, tough rhizomes of the wild rhubarb plant. Once dried into dense, woody blocks, these roots became one of the most highly sought-after medicinal treasures in all of Europe and the Islamic world. Apothecaries in Venice, Baghdad, and Alexandria paid exorbitant sums for this bitter, earthy root, utilizing its powerful properties to heal the digestive system and balance the humours of the body. The demand was so intense that Russian Tsars would later establish a strict armed monopoly over the rhubarb trade, guarding the dried roots as fiercely as they guarded their gold reserves. It is a beautiful shift in perspective, the realization that true healing often begins in the dark, cold earth, taking the form of a rough, unremarkable root waiting patiently to be discovered and understood. From the quiet, muddy earth where the rhubarb grew, we shift our gaze to the wide, grassy plains of Persia, where the earth was pounded by the thunderous rhythm of hooves. Here, the horses of the Silk Road were not just beasts of burden, but partners in an elegant, sweeping dance of athleticism known as chovgan, the ancient ancestor of polo. Originally developed as a training exercise for elite cavalry units, the game quickly blossomed into a beloved national pastime. Riders mounted on swift, agile Persian horses would gallop across a massive, dusty field, wielding long, flexible mallets of bamboo or willow to strike a small, lightweight wooden ball. What makes the history of this galloping sport so remarkable is its inclusion. Ancient manuscripts and intricate, illuminated miniature paintings clearly depict Persian noblewomen playing the game just as fiercely and skillfully as the men, their vibrant silk robes fluttering like bright banners in the wind. To watch a match was to witness a breathtaking display of balance, trust, and sheer kinetic joy. The rider and the horse moved as a single fluid entity, anticipating each other's shifts in weight and momentum without a single spoken command. Let that same fluidity enter your own resting body, smooth, weightless, and entirely in balance with the space around you. Your breathing is steady. Your mind is simply observing these passing scenes like watching soft clouds drift across an open twilight sky. There is no need to grasp at any of them. Let them rise, let them linger for a moment, and let them gently fade into the background. When the dust finally settled on the playing fields, and the horses were rubbed down and fed, the riders might have replenished their energy with a small, brilliant burst of nutrition native to the floodplains of the Yellow River. The goji berry, also known as the wolfberry, these tiny tear-shaped fruits grew on thorny, tangled shrubs that thrived in the harsh, alkaline soils where little else could survive. In the heavy heat of the late summer, the bushes would be weighed down by thousands of vibrant, fiery red berries. Because they were so incredibly delicate and prone to bruising, they were carefully shaken from the branches onto woven bamboo mats, then left to dry slowly in the arid, baking sun. As the moisture evaporated, the berries shriveled into chewy, deep crimson jewels, packing an astonishing density of vitamins, antioxidants, and pure restorative energy. Taoist monks and passing travellers would steep these dried berries in cups of hot water, creating a pale golden tea that tasted faintly of sweet earth and sunshine. Consuming them was an act of absorbing the very vitality of the landscape. Every small, wrinkled berry held a concentrated drop of life, a tiny reservoir of strength that fueled the long, demanding walks across the spine of the world. The quiet, meditative act of steeping tea often accompanied the most profound, resonant sounds of the evening camp. While we have witnessed the music of the Silk Road before, the true marvel lay in the deeply mathematical, almost spiritual construction of the instruments themselves. Consider the oud, the fretless, pear-shaped lute that became the grandfather of the modern guitar. The creation of an oud was a masterclass in the acoustic properties of nature. The deep, vaulted back of the instrument was not carved from a single block of wood. but painstakingly constructed from 15 to 25 paper-thin strips of lightweight wood, often walnut, sandalwood, or plum. These delicate strips were gently bent over a heated iron and glued together to form a flawless hollow teardrop. The soundboard, the flat face of the instrument, was carved from a single piece of straight-grained spruce, chosen for its supreme resonance. When a musician plucked the tightly wound strings with an eagle feather plectrum, the vibration travelled through the bridge, into the spruce, and bloomed outward through the intricate geometric rosettes carved into the face. It was a perfect marriage of mathematics, geometry, and organic material. The wood, once a silent tree standing in a distant forest, had been given a voice, translating the invisible mathematics of the universe into a deeply moving, emotional song. The delicate carved rosettes of the lute were designed to project beauty outward, but the travellers of the Silk Road also carried objects designed to deflect negative energy away. Strung around the necks of camels, stitched into the borders of saddlebags, and worn close to the skin of the merchants themselves, were small, mesmerising spheres of layered glass. The protective eye beads. These amulets, often tracing their origins back to the masterful glassmakers of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, were crafted by layering molten drops of blue, white, and dark yellow glass to form the unmistakable shape of an open, unblinking eye. In a world where sudden sandstorms, bandit raids, and invisible illnesses could strike without warning, these smooth, cool beads offered a profound psychological comfort. They were believed to stare back at the evil eye of misfortune, absorbing malice before it could touch the wearer. To hold one of these beads was to feel a smooth, continuous surface, an unbroken circle of protection in the palm of your hand. Think of this protective sphere now. Imagine a soft, cool blue light wrapping entirely around you, an invisible, tranquil shield that keeps the noise, the demands, and the stress of the waking world safely at bay. You're completely insulated within this quiet, resting space. While the glass eye stared blankly into the distance, a pair of real, fiercely intelligent eyes scanned the sweeping horizons of the Central Asian steppes from high above. The golden eagle and the ancient, breathtaking art of falconry. For the nomadic Kyrgyz and Kazakh tribes moving across the vast treeless expanses, survival in the bitter winters often depended on an extraordinary interspecies partnership. Hunters would climb dizzying, sheer cliff faces to capture a young wild eagle from its nest. Over months of intense, quiet dedication, the hunter and the massive bird with a wingspan reaching over 7 feet would forge a bond of absolute trust. The eagle was fitted with a beautifully tooled leather hood, covering its eyes to keep it completely calm in the chaotic, noisy environment of the human camps. When the hood was finally removed on the frozen, snow-swept plains, the eagle would launch into the blindingly bright sky, soaring on invisible thermal currents, possessing eyesight sharp enough to spot a hare moving from miles away. The bird did not hunt out of fear or force, but out of a deeply cultivated partnership with the human waiting patiently on the earth below. It is a stunning example of wild, untamed nature choosing to align itself with humanity, a silent pact made between the wind and the ground. As the eagle eventually circles back down, landing with a soft, heavy grace onto the thick leather gauntlet of the hunter, we too begin to descend back toward the quiet comforts of the settled earth. In the scorching, desert-bound cities of ancient Persia, such as the ancient metropolis of Yazd, the blistering heat of the day required a brilliant architectural response. Rising high above the flat, clay rooftops of the city were tall, elegant, chimney-like structures known as windcatchers or badgirs. These rectangular towers were open on all 4 sides, featuring carefully angled interior slats. They were designed to capture the slightest, most delicate breezes moving high above the stagnant heat of the streets. The wind would be snared by the tower, funneled down through the dark, cooling brick shafts, and directed into the living spaces below. Often, This descending air would pass over a small indoor pool of subterranean water, creating an ancient, incredibly effective form of evaporative air conditioning. Inside these desert homes, while the sun baked the earth outside to a blinding white, the air was cool, dim, and endlessly flowing. Imagine that gentle descending breeze now. Feel it moving softly across your forehead, a cool, invisible current washing through the room, carrying away the last remnants of the day's heat, preparing you for the deep, restorative shade of the hours ahead. Within that cooling shade, beneath the canopy of trees that clung stubbornly to the dry, stony slopes of the Middle East and Central Asia, travellers might reach into a woven pouch to find a small, perfect shell that splits naturally when ripe, as if offering a quiet smile, the pistachio. Native to regions where water is scarce and the sun is fiercely unforgiving, these rugged trees can survive for centuries in the poorest of soils, sinking their taproots incredibly deep into the earth to find hidden, underground moisture. The nuts they produce, protected by a pale, ivory-coloured hard shell and a delicate rosy-purple skin, reveal a heart of vibrant emerald green. Legend once held that the Queen of Sheba decreed pistachios an exclusively royal food, forbidding commoners from growing them, but along the Silk Road they were a favoured, sustaining energy source for weary merchants. Sitting by a fading fire in the twilight, listening to the soft, rhythmic snap of the shells being opened by calloused hands was a comforting auditory marker of the day's end. It reminds us that sometimes a tough exterior is simply nature's brilliant way of protecting something deeply vibrant and nourishing until the exact right moment of opening. The warm, golden-green hue of the pistachio shell shares its subtle spirit with a much older, fossilised treasure that travelled an unimaginably long route from the freezing grey shores of the Baltic Sea down through the arterial network of the Silk Road. Amber. This was not a cold stone forged in tectonic fire and pressure, but the soft golden tears of ancient prehistoric pine trees. Millions of years ago, sticky, fragrant resin oozed from the bark of these massive evergreens, sometimes catching a stray fleck of moss, a tiny droplet of water, or a drifting seed, before falling to the earth and hardening into a translucent gem over eons. By the time this fossilized resin reached the bustling markets of Chang'an or the jewelers of Rome, it was prized not just for its beauty, but for its mysterious electrostatic properties. When an artisan rubbed a piece of amber with a woolen cloth, it would magically attract small feathers or dried leaves, a phenomenon the ancient Greeks called electron. To hold a piece of polished heavy amber to the sun is to look directly through a window into a forest that existed long before humanity, a captured drop of ancient sunlight resting comfortably in the palm of your hand. As you hold that imagined, glowing warmth in your mind, let your own muscles uncoil. The body grows heavier, the mind softening into the quiet, unhurried rhythm of this long journey. The heavy woolen cloth used to polish that amber was itself the product of a revolutionary hypnotic technology that rolled quietly across the continents, changing the rhythm of human hands forever. The spinning wheel. Before its invention, likely in the Indian subcontinent or the Islamic Golden Age, threads were spun entirely by hand using a simple drop spindle, a slow, painstaking process of drop, twist, and pull. The spinning wheel translated this laborious task into a continuous, mesmerizing rotation. A single, large wooden wheel, driven by the rhythmic pressing of a foot pedal or the slow turning of a hand crank, transformed a sweeping circular motion into the rapid, vibrating spin of a small spindle. The raw, cloudy tufts of cotton or sheep's wool were magically drawn out into a single, unbroken line of perfect tension. The gentle, repetitive whir of the wheel, a low, mechanical humming sound, became a universal lullaby in households from Delhi to Damascus to Venice. The spinning wheel is a beautiful mechanical metaphor for patience, taking the chaotic, tangled fibres of raw material and through steady, circular motion, drawing them out into a strong unified thread of purpose. Those newly spun threads might eventually be dyed in brilliant vats of indigo, or they might be used to securely tie small, precious bundles of an exotic crystal that originated in the lush, tropical climates of India. Long before it was refined into the fine, powdery white sweetener we know today, the thick, sweet sap of the sugarcane plant was boiled down in massive iron vats until it formed heavy, golden-brown blocks. The ancient Indians discovered how to crystallize this dense syrup into large, glittering shards that looked remarkably like pale, cloudy quartz. They called it khanda, a Sanskrit word that would eventually travel the globe to become the English word candy. As these sweet, heavy crystals moved along the dusty tracks of the Silk Road, they were treated not as a common baking ingredient, but as a rare and potent medicine. Persian and Arab physicians prescribed sugar crystals to soothe persistent coughs, disguise the bitter taste of herbal remedies, and balance the invisible humours of the body. A small shard placed on the tongue would slowly dissolve, releasing a rich, complex sweetness that felt like pure, concentrated energy blooming in the mouth. It is a gentle reminder that the things which bring us the simplest, most profound comforts often have roots stretching back through centuries of careful, deliberate cultivation. The slow, patient dissolving of sugar mirrors the patient, underground waiting of a botanical wonder that would eventually ignite the artistic passions of entire empires. High in the freezing, windswept ranges of the Pamir and Tian Shan mountains, a small resilient bulb slumbered beneath feet of heavy winter snow. When the spring thaw finally arrived, melting the ice into rushing streams, this bulb pushed through the rocky, unyielding soil to bloom in sudden, startling splashes of scarlet, yellow and gold. This was the wild ancestor of the tulip. Nomadic Turkic tribes revered these vibrant cup-shaped flowers, viewing them as symbols of life and renewal in a harsh landscape. As the bulbs were carefully dug up and carried westward in saddlebags, they found a passionate reception in the royal gardens of the Ottoman Empire. The sultans became so enamoured with their elegant, swooping petals that the flower was embroidered onto the heavy silk robes of the court, painted onto delicate blue and white Iznik tiles, and celebrated in lavish, moonlit festivals where tortoises with candles on their shells wandered through the tulip beds. A flower born in the most abrasive, unforgiving mountain altitudes became the ultimate symbol of fragile, cultivated luxury. It tells us that sometimes the most striking beauty is born from the coldest, most isolated winters. From the high, crisp mountain air where the tulips bloomed, the caravans often descended into the disorienting, shimmering heat of the Taklamakan desert, where the very atmosphere played breathtaking tricks on the weary eye, the phenomenon of the mirage. As the midday sun baked the desert floor, it created a layer of intensely hot air directly above the sand, while the air higher up remained relatively cool. This severe, invisible temperature gradient acted as a massive fluid lens, refracting the light from the vast blue sky above and bending it upward into the traveller's field of vision. To the merchant leading a line of thirsty camels, it looked exactly like a tranquil, shimmering lake of sapphire water, resting just over the next golden dune, its surface rippling perfectly in the wind. The mirage is not a hallucination of a desperate mind, but an actual measurable optical event, a perfect reflection of the sky placed upon the earth. It is a striking illusion that gently teaches us to accept that not everything we perceive in moments of intense strain is exactly as it seems. Sometimes, the physical world simply paints an oasis where the mind most needs to find one. As the image of that shimmering, impossible water fades, allow your breath to settle even further. There is nowhere else you need to reach, just the steady, peaceful rise and fall of your chest. To ground themselves when the visual landscape became too overwhelming or deceptive, travellers would turn to the deeply mathematical anchoring resonance of wood and silk. In the eastern stretches of the journey, the cooling evening air was often filled with the bright cascading notes of the guzheng, an ancient Chinese zither. Carved from a single hollowed piece of resonant dry Paulownia wood, the instrument featured 21 strings of tightly twisted silk stretched across its long, elegantly curved body. Beneath each individual string rested a small, movable wooden bridge, delicately shaped to resemble a tiny resting wild goose. By gently sliding these small wooden geese up or down the face of the instrument, a musician could alter the tension and pitch of the strings, tuning the zither to match the exact emotional frequency of the room. When plucked, the silk strings produced a sound like clear water, dropping into a deep, echoing cavern, bright, metallic, and immensely calming. The act of sliding a small wooden bridge a fraction of an inch to find the perfect, harmonious pitch is a beautiful practice in subtle adjustment. Small, careful, almost imperceptible shifts can entirely change the resonance of our experience, bringing discord back into perfect harmony. As the bright cascading notes of the zither faded into the velvet night, the morning sun might reveal a stunning, almost otherworldly piece of architecture rising not from a royal city, but from the humble agricultural fields of Isfahan, the Kaftakhane, or pigeon towers. These were not stone fortresses built for soldiers to fend off invading armies, but colossal, beautifully engineered cylindrical castles built entirely for the comfort of birds. Reaching up to 60 feet high, the towers were constructed with intricate honeycombed interiors made of unbaked clay, providing perfectly measured individual nesting boxes for up to 10,000 wild pigeons. The birds were entirely free to come and go, soaring over the fields in massive sweeping flocks during the day and returning to the cool safety of the tower at night. In return for this secure, predator-free sanctuary, the pigeons provided a massive accumulation of rich guano, which the farmers carefully collected and used as a highly potent fertilizer for the surrounding melon patches, pistachio orchards, and rose gardens. The towers represent a brilliant, peaceful symbiosis between human architecture and wild nature. They stand proudly as monuments to the idea that providing shelter and safety to others often yields the most fertile, abundant rewards for oneself. Notice how the mind can simply drift from the high, airy towers down to the smallest, most intricate details. You do not need to hold on to any of these passing stories tightly. Let them flow through you like cool water washing over smooth, heavy stones. The towering scale of the pigeon castles contrasts sharply with the microscopic, exacting precision required for another essential tool of the Silk Road, the intaglio seal. Before the widespread use of written signatures on paper, merchants and royal officials verified their identities and secured their precious goods using small, deeply coloured stones, such as carnelian, banded agate, or lapis lazuli. Master carvers, working with infinite patience, would use spinning wheels coated in abrasive diamond dust to hollow out a design in reverse into the surface of the stone, a process requiring a magnifying crystal and an impossibly steady hand. When this carved gemstone, often set into a heavy gold signet ring, was pressed firmly into a pool of hot melted wax or a patch of damp clay sealing a scroll, it left behind a perfect raised relief of a mythical beast, a delicate family crest, or an eternal geometric knot. This tiny, heavy object held the incredible power to bind contracts and promise safe passage across warring empires. It teaches the quiet power of negative space, how the parts of ourselves we carve away, or the spaces we intentionally leave empty, can leave the most lasting, profound impressions on the world around us. Passing through the grand, heavy wooden gates sealed by those very clay rings, a traveller arriving in a lush oasis city might encounter a living, breathing jewel that seemed to defy the muted, dusty colours of the long road. The Indian peafowl, traded by wealthy merchants and gifted between royal courts as the ultimate symbol of terrestrial paradise, the peacock was viewed by those who had never seen one as a creature of almost mythological impossibility. As the male bird walked the manicured, shaded gardens of a Persian palace, he dragged a long, unassuming train of heavy feathers behind him, sweeping the stone paths. But when he chose to display, he would suddenly unfurl a massive shimmering fan of iridescent emerald green and gold, dotted with dozens of mesmerizing deep sapphire eyes. This astonishing radiant colour is not actually produced by any physical pigment within the feather, but by structural coloration, microscopic crystal-like structures layered in the keratin that reflect and refract light exactly like tiny suspended prisms. In the complete absence of light, the feathers are a dull, flat brown. They require the touch of the sun to reveal their spectacular brilliance. It is a stunning, quiet truth that the most magnificent displays of colour in the natural world are simply a matter of how a delicate structure catches the light. This ethereal play of light and structure, so evident in the peacock's fan, found its architectural twin in the soaring, tile-clad wonders of Samarkand. Standing in the centre of the Registan, the heart of this ancient city, one is surrounded by 3 massive madrasas, their facades completely covered in a skin of majolica and mosaic tiles. The most striking of these is the turquoise and azure glaze, a colour so deep and vibrant it seems to have been distilled from the desert sky itself. The artisans of the 14th century achieved this by mixing ground cobalt and copper with a translucent silicate glaze, firing it until it became a shimmering weatherproof glass. But the true genius lay in the geometry. They arranged these tiles in complex repeating patterns known as giri, which appear to the eye as endless stars and interlocking polygons. These patterns are so mathematically advanced that modern scientists have discovered they follow the principles of quasi-crystalline geometry, a concept not fully understood by Western mathematics until the 1970s. To look upon these walls is to see the infinite made manifest in baked clay. The patterns draw the eye inward, then outward, creating a sensation of profound rhythmic order that settles the mind into a state of quiet awe. The heavy, grounded permanence of those turquoise tiles offers a deep contrast to the light, fluttering pages that began to circulate through the city's vibrant libraries. In the 8th century, Samarkand became the site of the first paper mill outside of East Asia, thanks to a group of captured Chinese artisans who shared the secret of using mulberry bark and linen scraps. But the people of Central Asia added their own local refinement, using the abundant crops of winter wheat to create a starch paste that gave the paper a smooth, polished finish. This Samarkand paper was famed for its durability and its silky, cream-coloured surface, which allowed the ink of calligraphers to sit perfectly upon the page without bleeding. As you imagine the texture of that paper, cool, slightly textured and remarkably strong, let your own breathing mirror its steady, unchanging quality. The breath settles into a deep rhythmic flow, as natural as the turning of a page in a quiet room. There is nothing you need to hold on to. The stories of the past are merely drifting by, leaving you in a state of soft, unburdened awareness. This transition from raw bark to refined, polished paper was mirrored by a culinary transformation that travelled the length of the Silk Road, changing the very shape of how we eat, the noodle. While the origin of the noodle was long debated, the discovery of a perfectly preserved 4,000-year-old bowl of thin yellow noodles at the Lajia archaeological site in northwestern China settled the mystery. These ancient noodles were crafted from millet, a hardy grain that thrived in the dry yellow soil of the Lewis Plateau. As the knowledge of dough stretching travelled westward, it met the wheat-rich cultures of Central Asia and the Mediterranean, evolving into the countless shapes of pasta, lagman, and manti we know today. To a traveller, the noodle was a culinary masterpiece of efficiency, portable when dried, and instantly restorative when dropped into a pot of boiling water over a campfire. The sight of steam rising from a bowl of hot broth, the simple, honest texture of the dough, and the warmth it provided on a freezing mountain night became a universal symbol of hospitality. It is a reminder that the simplest things, flour, water, and a steady hand, can weave a thread of connection across thousands of miles and thousands of years. The warmth of a shared meal often took place in the flickering golden light of a substance that was as much a medicinal treasure as it was a source of illumination: beeswax. While oil lamps made of clay were common, the use of beeswax candles was a luxury reserved for the most sacred temples and the wealthiest courts of the Silk Road. Unlike tallow candles, which produced a heavy, acrid soot, beeswax burned with a clean, steady flame and emitted a faint, sweet aroma of honey and wildflower nectar. This wax was harvested from the complex hexagonal cities of the honeybee, which was itself a traveller along these routes. Beekeeping thrived in the lush valleys of Anatolia and the Mediterranean, and the wax was traded in heavy, fragrant blocks. When lit, a beeswax candle produces a light spectrum that is incredibly close to that of the sun, casting a warm, natural glow that softens the harsh edges of the world. Watching a candle flame, seeing the way it dances with the slightest movement of air, is a lesson in presence. It exists entirely in the now, burning brightly and calmly, providing a focal point of peace in the surrounding darkness. As the candle flame flickers, its light might catch the edge of a heavy, dark wood chest, releasing a scent that has come to define the very essence of ancient luxury: sandalwood. This dense, fine-grained wood comes from the santalum trees of India and Southeast Asia, and it possesses a quality almost unique in the botanical world. Its fragrance is not contained in the flowers or leaves, but in the heartwood itself. The scent is incredibly persistent, lasting for decades, even centuries, after the wood has been carved. Along the Silk Road, sandalwood was traded as heavy logs, fine powder, and concentrated oil. It was used to build entire temple doors, carve intricate statuettes, and provide the base for the world's most sophisticated incenses. The aroma is deep, creamy, and profoundly grounding, known for its ability to lower the heart rate and quiet the racing mind. To breathe in the scent of sandalwood is to be instantly transported to a place of stillness, a sheltered garden where the noise of the marketplace cannot reach. Imagine that scent now, a warm, woody embrace that signals to every cell in your body that it is time to rest. While the scent of sandalwood anchored the spirit, the physical body was often protected by a material that felt like a second skin, yet possessed the strength of a shield: boiled leather. To the nomadic warriors and the long-distance merchants, leather was a vital technology. By submerging thick hides of cattle or camel in a mixture of hot water, wax, and specific vegetable tannins, the fibres of the skin would contract and harden. Once dried over a wooden mould, the leather became as rigid as wood but remained remarkably lightweight. It was used to create everything from protective chest plates and sturdy helmets to the heavy, watertight trunks that carried silk across the Pamir Mountains. This process of hardening through heat and immersion created a material that was virtually indestructible, yet possessed a smooth, polished beauty that deepened with age. It serves as a quiet metaphor for the journey itself, how the pressures and the heat of life's challenges can serve to strengthen us, turning something soft into something resilient, capable of carrying the most precious cargoes safely to their destination. The heavy, dark texture of hardened leather finds a delicate, shimmering contrast in the golden peaches of Samarkand. During the Tang dynasty, these specific fruits were sent as a legendary tribute to the Chinese emperors. Unlike the common peach, these were described in ancient texts as being as large as goose eggs, and possessing a colour that resembled genuine gold. They were not merely food, they were symbols of the mysterious fertile power of the West. To transport such delicate, heavy fruit over thousands of miles required a logistical miracle. They were often picked while slightly underripe and nestled in protective layers of soft wool and straw, or preserved in jars of thick honey. The arrival of a single golden peach in the imperial capital was an event of great wonder, sparking poems and paintings. It reminds us of the value of rarity and the lengths to humanity will go to share a moment of pure sensory delight. The fruit represented the sun itself, captured in a soft, fuzzy skin, a fleeting taste of a distant paradise brought home. As the memory of that golden fruit settles, you might feel a similar sense of sweetness and warmth spreading through your own limbs. The body is still, the mind is at ease. You're simply a witness to these beautiful fragments of history, drifting like silk on a gentle breeze. Deep within the same mountains that produced the wild tulip and the golden peach, the earth held a secret that would eventually change the weight of the world: borax. This white crystalline mineral was discovered in the dry saline lake beds of Tibet. To the ancient goldsmiths and silversmiths of the Silk Road, borax was a miraculous flux. When ground into a powder and added to molten metal, it lowered the melting point and prevented oxidation, allowing the artisans to solder delicate wires of gold into the breathtaking patterns of filigree. Without this humble white salt from the high altitudes, the intricate jewellery of the ancient world, the earrings of Persian princesses and the crowns of nomadic kings, could never have reached such a level of gossamer-thin perfection. It was a bridge between the raw power of the furnace and the delicate intent of the artist. It is a reminder that the most spectacular results often depend on a quiet, invisible catalyst, something small and modest that makes the impossible suddenly fluid and workable. The shimmering gold filigree created with the help of borax often depicted creatures of myth and power, none more significant than the dragon. But on the Silk Road, the dragon was not the fire-breathing monster of Western lore. It was a benevolent, celestial being associated with water, clouds, and the life-giving rain. This imagery travelled westward, blending with the artistic styles of Persia and Central Asia. In the beautiful blue and white ceramics we discussed earlier, the dragon is often seen winding its way through stylized clouds and cresting waves. Its body is serpentine and fluid, embodying the very essence of the trade routes themselves, a long, winding connection that brings life and prosperity to the lands it touches. To the travellers, the dragon was a guardian of the hidden treasures of the earth and the deep mysteries of the sea. Its presence on a silk robe or a porcelain vase was a silent prayer for protection and a recognition of the powerful, invisible forces that govern the natural world. The serpentine path of the dragon eventually leads us back to the most fundamental element of the journey, the road itself. But in many parts of the Silk Road there was no road at all. In the vast high-altitude plateaus, travellers followed the lines of stone. These were literal paths cleared of large rocks and debris over centuries, leaving a slightly smoother, lighter track through the dark, jagged landscape. In the blinding glare of the sun or the silver light of the moon, these cleared paths would glow slightly differently than the surrounding earth, providing a subtle, natural guide for the caravan. They were not built by a single government or a great conqueror, but by the collective footsteps of millions of people and animals over thousands of years. Each traveller who moved a stone to clear the way was a silent contributor to a global network. It is a profound, grounding thought that the most important paths in our lives are often those built slowly, step by step, by the quiet, repeated actions of those who came before us. We are never truly walking alone. We are following a trail of light and intention that stretches back through the very heart of time. As you walk this path in your mind, the air begins to cool and the stars grow brighter, casting a soft silver light over the ancient stones. The horizon is wide and peaceful, and the sound of the wind is a gentle rhythmic hum that lulls the senses into a state of total surrender. The journey continues, always moving toward the next sanctuary, the next moment of rest, as the night deepens and the world falls into a beautiful historic sleep. When the weary eyes of the travellers finally closed and the physical world of blowing sand and rugged stone softened into darkness, the ancient mind did not stop exploring. It simply directed its gaze upward. High on a flattened hill in northwestern Iran, far above the noise of the trade routes, stood a monument dedicated entirely to the quiet observation of the infinite, the Maraga Observatory. Built in the 13th century, this staggering scientific complex was not a fortress of war, but a sprawling sanctuary of astronomy. It housed a library of over 400,000 manuscripts and gathered the most brilliant minds from across the known world. Chinese mathematicians, Persian scholars, and Arab philosophers, all working shoulder to shoulder in the cool night air. The observatory possessed no optical telescopes. Instead, they relied on a colossal mural quadrant, an enormous graduated arc carved directly into the stone walls, used to track the slow, majestic progression of the stars and planets with absolute naked-eye precision. To stand in the centre of that vast open-air structure, wrapped in a heavy woolen cloak against the midnight chill, was to realise that the universe moves at its own unhurried, mathematically perfect pace. There is a profound peace in understanding that the chaotic events of the earth below are overseen by a canopy of silent, predictable harmony above. To bring those massive, sweeping, celestial arcs down to a scale the human mind could touch, master metalworkers cast the heavens in heavy polished bronze. This was the armillary sphere. It was an astonishing three-dimensional model of the cosmos, a skeletal globe consisting of perfectly concentric, interlocking metal rings. Each intricately engraved ring represented a vital geometric line of the sky, the equator, the ecliptic path of the sun, and the meridian lines of the stars. These heavy, nested circles were mounted on an axis, allowing a scholar to smoothly rotate the entire cosmos by hand. When the bronze rings were turned, imitating the slow rotation of the night sky, the metal produced a low, resonant, gliding sound, a subtle mechanical hum that filled the quiet chambers of the observatory. To rest your hand on the cold, solid bronze of the ecliptic ring and physically spin the path of the sun is a beautiful tactile metaphor. It takes the unimaginably vast, terrifying scale of space and distills it into an elegant, manageable object resting quietly on a wooden table. The low, resonant sound of rotating metal high in the observatory found a staggering, thunderous echo in the fertile river valleys far below. Along the banks of the Oronte River in the ancient city of Hama, the concept of the turning wheel took on a monumental, almost mythological scale. Here, the flow of the water was harnessed by the Norias, gigantic wooden water wheels, some reaching over 60 feet in diameter. Built entirely of dark, waterlogged timber and held together with massive iron nails, these wheels were designed with small wooden buckets along their rims. As the current of the river pushed against the submerged paddles, the colossal wheel would slowly, inevitably turn, lifting the river water high into the air and spilling it into elevated stone aqueducts to irrigate the parched agricultural fields. The turning of these massive structures produces a deep, rhythmic, groaning sound, a slow, wooden heartbeat that echoes continuously across the valley. It is the sound of absolute, unyielding momentum. As you imagine the heavy, continuous turning of those great wooden wheels, feel the slow, steady rhythm of your own pulse. Notice how the body grows pleasantly heavier with every breath, sinking deeper into a state of total ease. There is a deep, comforting momentum carrying you forward through this journey, requiring absolutely no effort on your part. You can simply let the current of the story move you. While those colossal water wheels nourished the sprawling fields, the bustling markets that relied on those crops were fueled by a currency of incredibly small, delicate beauty: the cowrie shell. Harvested from the warm, shallow turquoise reefs of the Indian Ocean, particularly around the isolated atolls of the Maldives, these small, glossy, egg-shaped seashells travelled thousands of miles overland. They flowed into the mountainous provinces of southwestern China, across the dusty plains of India, and deep into the heart of Central Asia. The cowrie was the perfect ancient currency. It was incredibly lightweight, virtually impossible to counterfeit, and wonderfully smooth to the touch. The journey of the cowrie shell is a marvel of geographical perspective. Imagine a tiny, pristine piece of the tropical ocean floor, carrying the memory of warm salt water and coral reefs, passing through the calloused hands of Tibetan merchants and Himalayan guides navigating freezing, oxygen-starved mountain passes. It is a testament to the fact that something incredibly small and fragile can traverse the most brutal landscapes on Earth if it is valued enough by the hands that hold it. To carry those delicate ocean shells, along with impossibly heavy bales of fermented tea, across the jagged roof of the world, the merchants relied on an animal perfectly sculpted by nature for the crushing altitudes of the Himalayas, the yak. Unlike the swaying camels of the sandy deserts, the yak is a creature of the ice. Possessing incredibly dense, shaggy coats of black and dark brown hair that sweep the snowy ground like heavy blankets, yaks project a serene, almost meditative stoicism. Their physiology is a masterpiece of high-altitude adaptation. Their lungs and hearts are unusually large, allowing them to pull the faintest traces of oxygen from the impossibly thin mountain air. As a caravan moves through a blinding whiteout snowstorm, the yaks do not panic and they do not rush. They place each wide, split hoof with absolute deliberate care, gripping the treacherous, icy trails with flawless precision. Their breath plumes in thick white clouds of steam. To walk alongside a yak is to learn the profound power of pacing. When the path is impossibly steep and the air is violently cold, the only way forward is a slow, rhythmic, unshakable march. The white, crusted landscapes traversed by the yaks often mirrored another harsh, brilliant environment that was absolutely crucial to the survival of the ancient world: the blinding white salt flats. Before the invention of modern refrigeration, salt was not merely a culinary seasoning to enhance a meal. It was the sole guarantor of preservation, a miraculous mineral that possessed the power to stop the decay of time itself. In the deep, arid basins of Central Asia, such as the sprawling Qaidam Basin, salt was not harvested as a fine, loose powder. It was mined from the earth in massive, translucent blocks. These heavy, crystalline slabs were loaded onto the backs of pack animals, and in some remote regions were traded weight for weight with pure gold. To hold a rough, unpolished cube of rock salt up to the light of a campfire is to see a frozen, geometric perfection, glowing from within like a piece of captured ice. It represents a promise of longevity, a tangible way to keep the harvest safe and whole through the long, barren, unforgiving winters. Let that same sense of deep safety and preservation settle over you now. Just as the salt protects the harvest, the quiet hours of the night protect your energy, keeping you safe and whole. Your breath is a slow, rhythmic tide. The mind can simply drift, knowing that everything important is secure, held perfectly still in the quiet of the room. In the soft grey light of the morning, after breaking camp on the edges of those vast salt lakes, a traveller might reach into their leather pack for an object of surprising intimacy, a tool perfected during the golden age of the Tang dynasty, the bristle toothbrush. Before this brilliant invention, people across the world polished their teeth by rubbing them with frayed twigs or chewing on sweet-smelling fibrous barks. But Chinese artisans ingeniously reimagined this daily ritual. They took stiff, coarse hairs from the necks of Siberian boars, animals perfectly adapted to the freezing, harsh climates of the north, and meticulously threaded them into tiny, precise holes, bored into a carved handle of smooth bamboo or polished animal bone. This small, highly personal tool travelled westward along the trade routes, slowly transforming the daily morning routines of entire empires. It is a gentle, grounding reminder that history is not solely shaped by the sweeping movements of massive armies or the construction of giant towers, but also by the quiet, intimate, everyday habits we perform in the soft, private light of dawn. Stepping from that bright, solitary morning sun into the heart of a bustling Persian city, a traveller would seek refuge from the heat by entering the breathtaking, cavernous space of a timche, or domed bazaar. These were colossal, vaulted structures built entirely of fired clay brick, specifically designed by master architects to provide deep, cooling shade in the blistering summer and insulation in the freezing winter. The ceiling of a Tim chair was a masterpiece of interlocking geometric arches, soaring upward to culminate in a high, circular oculus. Through this single, perfectly placed opening in the roof, a dramatic, concentrated shaft of pure sunlight would pierce the dim, dusty air of the market. This singular beam of light illuminated floating, lazy motes of dust, eventually striking the vibrant reds and deep blues of the silk carpets laid out meticulously on the floor below. The complex brick geometry of the soaring dome provided a miraculous acoustic dampening, catching the chaotic noise of thousands of bartering merchants, clinking coins and braying pack animals, and turning it all into a low, soothing, oceanic murmur. Where that brilliant, concentrated beam of light hit the market floor, it often illuminated woven baskets overflowing with a fruit that carried the very essence of the summer sun within its flesh. The dried apricot. Native to the lush, mountainous valleys of Central Asia, the fresh apricot is a delicate velvet-skinned fruit, highly prone to bruising and rapid spoiling. It could never survive the brutal weeks of travel across the open desert. To carry this sweetness to the edges of the world, orchard keepers perfected the patient art of sun-drying. At the peak of the summer harvest, they would halve the fruit, remove the smooth, almond-like pit, and lay the bright orange flesh out on the flat clay roofs of their homes. The fierce, baking heat of the sun slowly evaporated the water, transforming the delicate, fragile fruit into a chewy, deeply caramelized medallion. These dried apricots became the ultimate, indispensable endurance food of the Silk Road, incredibly lightweight, entirely imperishable, and bursting with concentrated energy and natural sugar. To eat one on a freezing mountain pass was to experience a sudden, vivid burst of midsummer warmth. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon outside the high brick walls of the bazaar, the frantic energy of the day's trade gave way to the quiet, slow companionship of the evening. On a low wooden table in the corner of a caravanserai, between 2 cups of steaming dark tea, the ancient game of nard, the direct Persian ancestor of modern backgammon, would be unfolded. Played on a beautifully hinged wooden board often inlaid with shimmering mother-of-pearl, the game was steeped in deep cosmic symbolism. The board itself represented the passage of a year, the 24 points symbolised the hours of the day, and the 30 heavy wooden checkers represented the days of the month. The movement of the pieces was entirely dictated by the rolling of 2 small dice, carved carefully from bone or ivory, representing the unpredictable, uncontrollable hand of fate. The steady, rhythmic clack of the wooden pieces sliding gracefully across the polished board, followed by the soft, sharp rattle of the dice tumbling onto the wood, created a soothing, repetitive soundtrack to the night. It is a game that beautifully balances thoughtful strategy with total surrender. We make our very best moves with the pieces we have, but we must ultimately peacefully accept the roll of the dice. As that gentle, clicking rhythm of the wooden game pieces slowly fades into the surrounding quiet of the room, you can allow yourself to fully and completely surrender to the night. There are no more moves to make today, no more complex decisions to weigh, and nothing left to calculate, just the slow, steady, comforting current of the dark, carrying you effortlessly onward toward the next horizon. And when the earthly horizon finally dissolved into the deep, cooling velvet of the night, the ancient mind simply directed its gaze upward, seeking a completely different kind of map. Hidden for centuries within the dry, sealed chambers of the Mogao caves lay a scroll of breathtaking ambition, the Dunhuang Star Atlas. Created over 1,000 years ago, it is the oldest complete preserved star map in the entire world. Using fine brushes and dark, sweeping ink on delicate mulberry paper, an unknown astronomer painstakingly charted over 1,300 individual stars, grouping them into ancient constellations that guided the caravans across the trackless sands. The map does not show a flat, static sky, but is projected using incredibly complex mathematics, unwrapping the celestial sphere into a long, continuous, elegant ribbon. To look at this fragile paper is to realize that the human desire to find order, to draw meaningful connections between distant points of light in the overwhelming dark, is a deeply universal comfort. The chaotic, infinite expanse of space was gently organized into a quiet, reliable guide, a starry compass resting softly in the hands of the traveler. That same deeply rooted instinct to reach toward the heavens was cultivated not just in ink, but in the fragrant rising smoke of the desert. In the unforgiving sun-baked wadis of the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa grew a gnarled, remarkably resilient tree, the boswellia. To survive the blistering heat and profound lack of surface water, this tree produced a thick protective resin. When nomadic harvesters made careful, shallow cuts into the pale bark, the tree would weep small, milky droplets. These teardrops were left to harden in the hot sun for weeks, transforming into translucent, pale, golden pebbles. This was frankincense. Carried in heavy leather sacks along the incense routes that eventually merged with the Silk Road, these small stones possessed a transformative magic. When placed upon a glowing charcoal ember, the resin melted instantly, releasing a thick, white, billowing smoke that smelled of sharp pine, warm citrus, and ancient earth. The scent was scientifically and spiritually profound, containing natural compounds that actively deepened the breath and quieted the anxious mind. The smoke drifting slowly upward was a physical aromatic bridge between the heavy earth and the weightless sky. As that fragrant smoke drifted upward in the grand caravanserais and resting halls of the Islamic world, it would often catch and pool within a staggering architectural illusion designed to mirror the starry heavens above, the muqarnas. This was a complex, mesmerizing system of ornamental vaulting, often described as honeycomb or stalactite architecture. Master builders used hundreds of small, intricately carved geometric tiers of stucco, brick, or carved stone to seamlessly transition the sharp, square corners of a room into the smooth, sweeping curve of a magnificent dome. Instead of a flat, heavy ceiling pressing down on the weary traveller, the ceiling appeared to dissolve entirely into a cascade of weightless geometric prisms. The muqarnas caught the faint, flickering light of oil lamps, casting millions of intricate, softly shifting shadows that made the heavy stone appear as light as a hovering cloud. To lie beneath such a ceiling after months of walking under an open, terrifyingly vast sky was to feel entirely held and protected by a dome of gentle, man-made stars. You too are completely held and protected in this moment. Notice how the quiet structure of your own resting space supports you without any effort on your part. Your body sinks deeper, growing pleasantly heavy, while the mind simply floats, weightless, secure, and free. The blurred, shifting shadows of the stone muqarnas found a beautiful tactile twin in the bustling textile markets, where dyers mastered a technique that celebrated the hypnotic beauty of soft, unfocused edges. This was the ancient art of ikat. In traditional weaving, solid coloured threads are crossed to create crisp, sharp, geometric patterns. But in the creation of ikat silk, the threads of the warp are tightly bound with wax or grasses and repeatedly dyed before they ever touch the wooden loom. The artisan must visualize the final, complex pattern entirely in their mind, dyeing the loose bundles of thread in vibrant pools of indigo, madder root, and saffron. When these pre-dyed threads are finally stretched across the loom and woven together, they never align with absolute mathematical perfection. Instead, the colours bleed and shift slightly, creating patterns that appear to vibrate, resembling the hazy feathered edges of a drifting cloud or a reflection upon rippling water. The fabric teaches a quiet, enduring lesson that breathtaking beauty does not require rigid, absolute perfection. The soft, feathered edges, the slight shifts and gentle misalignments are exactly what give the material its soul and its movement. Those hazy, cloud-like patterns of woven silk perfectly mimicked the sudden, breathtaking phenomenon that signalled the end of the long, brutal mountain winters, the blooming of the wild almond tree, clinging to the rocky, arid slopes of the Levant and Central Asia, the almond tree is a master of patience and sudden, spectacular transformation. Long before it produces the green, fuzzy hulls that protect its nutrient-dense seeds, and remarkably, long before it even sprouts a single green leaf, the bare, dark branches burst into a massive canopy of pale pink and snowy white blossoms. It is one of the very first signs of life in the ancient agricultural calendar, an explosion of fragile, luminous colour against a stark, sleeping brown landscape. To a caravan emerging from a freezing, snow-locked mountain pass, the sight of an almond grove in full bloom was a profound psychological relief, a soft visual whisper that the harshest days were finally behind them, that the earth was awakening, and that warmth and sustenance were returning to the quiet valleys. To capture the fleeting, translucent beauty of a spring petal and render it permanent, the artisans of the East and West collaborated through the exchange of an exquisite, deeply demanding craft, cloisonné. This metalworking technique required a level of microscopic focus that forced the artist into a state of deep, meditative silence. Using silver or gold wire as thin as a single strand of human hair, the craftsman would bend and solder the metal onto a smooth bronze vase, creating tiny walled compartments called cloisons. These microscopic, empty valleys were then meticulously filled with crushed, vibrant glass paste using the precise tip of a fine needle. When the object was placed into a roaring kiln, the glass melted perfectly, fusing with the metal to create a smooth, permanent, vibrantly coloured enamel. An entire landscape of lotus flowers, hovering birds, and twisting vines could be contained seamlessly within the palm of a hand. The creation of such an object required absolute unwavering stillness. A single, trembling breath could scatter the glass dust and ruin hours of quiet devotion. Let the slow, deliberate rhythm of that ancient artisan become your own rhythm. The breathing is slow, the heart rate is beautifully steady. The mind does not need to rush forward to the next moment, but can simply rest here, appreciating the quiet, empty spaces between thoughts. From the delicate, glittering glass of imperial quartz, the journey descends back into the vast, dry quiet of the Tarim Basin, where the deep sands preserved a mystery of warmth and surprising comfort. In the early 20th century, archaeologists uncovered a series of perfectly preserved ancient burials in the harsh Taklamakan Desert. But it was not gold or jade that stunned the world. It was the heavy clothing draped over these silent figures. Known as the Tarim mummies, these travellers from thousands of years ago were wrapped in thick woven wool. Remarkably, the fabric was woven in a diagonal twill pattern of deep blues, earthy reds, and warm browns, a style of plaid almost identical to the ancient tartans of the Celtic tribes on the far western edge of Europe. This simple, heavy cloth radically shifted our understanding of human connection. It revealed that long before the formal establishment of the Silk Road, nomadic families were moving across the vast Eurasian landmass, carrying sheep, simple wooden looms, and a universal human desire to wrap themselves in a heavy, warming, familiar pattern to gracefully ward off the biting cold of the desert night. The invisible, freezing winds that necessitated those heavy woolen cloaks were not merely endured. In the arid, desolate Sistan Basin on the borders of ancient Persia, the relentless wind was brilliantly, quietly put to work. Here, where rivers were scarce and the traditional water wheel was useless, engineers invented the panemone, the world's first windmill. Unlike the iconic spinning crosses of the European landscape, these Persian mills were built on a vertical axis. Engineers constructed tall mud brick walls with strategic narrow openings that caught the fierce wind of 120 days and funneled it inward. This concentrated gale pushed against massive upright sails made of tightly woven reed bundles attached to a central wooden axle. As the axle spun horizontally, it turned the heavy circular millstones resting in the room below. There is a deep, rhythmic comfort in the mechanics of the panemone. It represents a beautiful yielding to the forces of nature. Rather than fighting the overwhelming endless wind, the ancient builders built a structure that allowed the invisible current to pass through it, transforming a harsh elemental force into the life-sustaining act of grinding flour for daily bread. The howling sound of the wind moving through those woven reed sails found a deliberate, incredibly melodic voice on the sweeping grasslands of the Mongolian steppes, the morin khur or the horsehead fiddle. As caravans skirted the northern routes of the Silk Road, the evenings were filled with the sound of this profound instrument. Crafted with a trapezoidal wooden body and a long neck topped with the carved head of a horse, the instrument possessed only 2 strings. But those strings, and the bow used to play them, were made entirely of horsehair. When the resin-coated bow was drawn across the strings, it produced a deep, incredibly rich, sweeping resonance that defied its simple, earthly construction. The master musicians did not just play notes, they used the instrument to flawlessly mimic the sounds of their vast open world. The strings could whisper like the wind cutting through tall grass, thunder like a herd of wild horses galloping across the plains, or sigh like the long mournful cry of a migrating bird. To listen was to feel the sheer, limitless expanse of the steppe stretching out in every direction, gently dissolving the walls of any room. As you imagine that low, sweeping vibration, feel the space around you beautifully expanding. The walls softly fade, the ceiling lifts away, the mind is entirely free to wander across an open, endless, peaceful plain, completely untethered from the heavy worries of the day. To move across such limitless, open plains, the ancient travellers required a completely different method of measuring the world. They did not rely on the rigid, abstract geometry of miles or kilometres. Instead, the ancient Persians measured the earth using the farsakh or the parasang. This was not a fixed distance of space, but a profound measurement of time, human effort and rhythm. A farsakh was defined as the exact distance a heavily laden mule or a caravan could comfortably walk in a single hour. In a flat, smooth, sunlit valley, a farsakh might be 4 miles. Up a steep, jagged, ice-covered mountain pass, a farsakh might be less than 2. It was a deeply human way to understand a long journey. It did not judge the road by a harsh line on a map, but by the physical reality of the earth and the steady, patient rhythm of the footfalls upon it. It teaches us a deeply comforting truth about progress. The journey is never truly about the sheer distance we have yet to cover. It is simply about maintaining a steady, easy pace, taking 1 hour at a time and allowing the natural rhythm of our steps to carry us gracefully forward. As the heavy, rhythmic steps of the caravan slow down for the night, the concept of distance melts away entirely. There is nowhere left to travel in the dark. You're simply resting in the vast, quiet space between the stars, measuring the peaceful passing of the night entirely by the slow, easy, unhurried rhythm of your own breath. In that vast, quiet space, where time stretches out and the urgency of the day completely dissolves, we find a living monument to sheer, unyielding endurance. Along the shifting, unpredictable edges of the Taklamakan Desert grows the Euphrates poplar, often known as the hero tree of the sands. This remarkable tree is a master of survival in an environment that actively rejects life. Its roots can plunge nearly 100 feet deep, twisting through the dry earth to find hidden, underground aquifers. But its true magic lies in its astonishing lifespan. Local legends, grounded in the tree's incredible resilience, claim that the poplar lives for 1,000 years, stands dead in the desert without falling for another 1,000 years, and rests upon the earth without decaying for 1,000 more. In the late autumn, the leaves of these ancient guardians turn a blinding, brilliant gold, creating a winding river of light against the desolate grey dunes. To rest beneath one of these poplars is to sit in the shade of a timeline that dwarfs human history. It offers a profound, grounding comfort, the knowledge that even in the most barren stretches of our lives, there is a deep, ancient capacity to not only survive, but to stand tall and eventually bloom into a brilliant golden light. The brilliant gold of those autumn leaves finds a striking cool contrast in the heavy stones pulled from the rocky earth of northeastern Persia. High on the slopes of Mount Ali Mersai, near the ancient city of Nishapur, miners extracted a mineral that seemed to hold a piece of the clear, cloudless sky. Turquoise. This opaque, mesmerizing stone was formed by the slow, patient percolation of copper and aluminum-rich waters through volcanic rock over millions of years. Unlike the faceted, glittering diamonds of the modern era, turquoise was valued for its solid, soothing depth of colour, ranging from a pale robin's egg blue to a rich, deep teal, often laced with intricate webs of dark matrix rock that looked like delicate fossilised spiderwebs. The ancient Persians called it Piruze, meaning victory, and believed that looking closely at the stone strengthened the eyes and immediately calmed the anxious heart. As it was carried along the Silk Road into the markets of the Ottoman Empire, the Europeans named it pierre turquoise, or the Turkish stone. To hold a polished piece of Nishapur turquoise in the palm of your hand is to hold a fragment of the ancient eternal sky, brought down to earth to offer a quiet, heavy serenity. As the blue of the sky deepens into the dark velvet of the evening, the air along the southern routes of the journey begins to change. A new, entirely invisible cargo takes over the atmosphere. This is the scent of Jasminum sambac, the night-blooming jasmine. Native to the lush, humid foothills of the Himalayas, this unassuming vine with its dark green waxy leaves looks completely ordinary during the blinding heat of the day. Its small, tightly furled white buds remain closed, conserving their delicate energy, waiting patiently for the harsh sun to vanish. But the moment the twilight settles and the temperature drops, the petals slowly unfurl, releasing a heavy, intoxicating, deeply sweet fragrance into the cooling air. The Silk Road was not just a conduit for solid objects, but for botanical wonders that transformed the sensory landscape of the world. Kings and merchants alike planted these vines in the inner courtyards of their walled gardens, ensuring that the night itself would be perfumed. The night-blooming jasmine holds a beautiful whispered secret. Some of the most profound and beautiful things in this world do not require the bright spotlight of the day. They open only in the dark, offering their sweetness to the quiet, restful hours. The slow, deliberate unfurling of the jasmine petals stands in sharp contrast to a vibrant, kinetic art form that captivated the courts of the East, a dance that mirrored the twisting winds of the desert. In the grand, torchlit banquet halls of the Tang dynasty, the heavy air was often sliced by the breathtaking energy of the Sogdian whirlwind dance. The Sogdians, the master merchants of the Silk Road, did not just trade silk and spices, they traded rhythm. Dressed in soft leather boots and flowing tunics of vibrant crimson and emerald green, the dancers would leap onto a small, perfectly woven circular rug. To the rapid, driving beat of hand drums and the bright strumming of the lute, they would begin to spin. They spun with such ferocious, incredible speed that their colourful garments blurred into a single hovering sphere of light, their movements mimicking the sweeping dust devils of the steppes they called home. Yet, at the very centre of this furious rotation, the dancer's head remained perfectly level, their eyes softly focused, their balance absolute. They were the calm, silent centre of their own storm. As you picture that flawless centred balance, feel your own body sinking deeper into stillness. You do not need to spin, you do not need to move, you are the quiet, resting centre. The world may swirl around you, but right here, right now, the body is heavy, the breathing is slow, and the mind is entirely at peace. The mesmerizing circular spin of the dancer eventually slows, echoing another, far more pragmatic circle that revolutionized the movement of heavy burdens across the most treacherous mountain paths. Long before the wheelbarrow appeared in the agricultural fields of Europe, the brilliant engineers of ancient China devised a tool known as the wooden ox, or the gliding horse. But this was not the awkward, front-heavy wheelbarrow we picture today. The genius of the Chinese design lay in the careful placement of the wheel. They mounted a single, massive wooden wheel directly in the centre of the cart, entirely beneath the cargo. This meant the wheel, not the human, carried the entire weight of the load. A single merchant could effortlessly push hundreds of pounds of raw silk, iron tools or grain along incredibly narrow winding cliffside trails that were far too steep for horses or oxen. It was a masterpiece of applied physics, a profound lesson in leverage and grace. It quietly demonstrates that when a burden feels entirely too heavy to bear, the solution is not always to push harder, but to simply shift the centre of gravity. By making a small, intelligent adjustment, the impossible weight becomes light, gliding effortlessly over the stones. The rhythmic wooden creak of the gliding horse shared the acoustic space of the trail, with a much deeper, more resonant sound. The specialised bronze bells of the camel caravans. These were not ordinary high-pitched chimes meant for gentle pastures. The master metallurgists who cast these bells understood the terrifying physics of the open desert. During a massive sandstorm, the howling wind and thick abrasive dust could reduce visibility to zero, swallowing the sound of human voices entirely. A caravan could be scattered and lost within minutes. Therefore, the lead camel wore a massive heavy bronze bell, often nested with a smaller bell inside it, designed to produce a low, sonorous, penetrating clank. These specific low-frequency sound waves were uniquely capable of travelling great distances without being absorbed or scattered by the swirling sand. In the blinding, terrifying chaos of a storm, that steady metallic heartbeat was the only tether to safety. It was a sound that meant connection, direction, and survival. Even in the deepest, most disorienting moments of the journey, there was always a clear, resonant tone leading the way home. Let the steady, slow beating of your own heart serve as that same comforting bell, a quiet rhythm anchoring you safely in the dark. When the howling sandstorm finally cleared and the caravan reached the sanctuary of a shaded oasis, the dry, parched throats of the travellers were often soothed by a fruit that had made an impossible journey from the deserts of southern Africa, the watermelon. Before it was carefully cultivated into the sweet, bright red fruit of modern summer picnics, the ancient watermelon was a tough, pale, bitter orb that possessed one miraculous quality. It could store pure water for months on end in the sweltering heat. As the seeds travelled northward through the Nile Valley and eventually along the Silk Road, agriculturalists patiently selected for sweetness and vibrant colour. But to the desert merchant, its true value was pure, life-saving hydration. A thick-rinded watermelon could be carried in a heavy saddlebag or buried deep in the cool sand of a resting camp, acting as a natural biological canteen. When sliced open under the blazing midday sun, the crisp, watery flesh offered an immediate cooling relief that felt like a gift from the heavens. The journey of the watermelon is a beautiful story of deep adaptation. How a tough, bitter survivor from one desert was slowly nurtured and transformed into a sweet, refreshing comfort for the weary travellers of another. The cooling, life-giving water contained within the melon was revered not just for physical survival, but for the profound spiritual symbolism it nurtured in the muddy, still ponds of the East, the sacred lotus. As Buddhist monks travelled the winding arteries of the Silk Road, establishing remote monasteries and carving intricate grottos into the cliffs, they carried with them the imagery of this astonishing flower. The lotus begins its life deep in the dark, heavy, oxygen-starved mud at the very bottom of a stagnant pond. It slowly pushes a single, green shoot upward through the murky water, patiently seeking the light. When it finally breaches the surface, it unfolds a massive, flawless blossom of breathtaking pink or pure white. But the true miracle of the lotus is a microscopic phenomenon known today as the lotus effect. The rough, invisible texture of its petals completely repels water and dust. When rain falls, it beads up and rolls off, carrying the dirt with it. No matter how muddy the environment around it, the flower remains perfectly, immaculately clean. To the weary traveller and the meditating monk, the lotus was the ultimate symbol of human potential, a promise that no matter how difficult or chaotic the environment might be, the mind possesses the inherent ability to rise above it, blooming with absolute unsullied clarity. Imagine that pristine flower opening slowly on the surface of a quiet pond. Just like the lotus, you can let any remaining dust or noise from the waking day simply roll off you. The mind is clear, the body is rested. You're entirely untouched by the rush of the world, blooming softly into the peace of the night. To protect such delicate blooming flowers and the fragile water-sensitive cargoes of silk and paper, the scholars of ancient China developed a mesmerizing, deeply calming instrument to predict the weather. The world's first hygrometer. Long before digital sensors and satellite imaging, atmospheric humidity was measured using a simple, beautifully balanced scale. On one side of the scale they hung a piece of heavy porous charcoal, and on the other a small bundle of lightweight bird feathers. Because charcoal is highly hygroscopic, it naturally absorbs the invisible moisture lingering in the air. When the air grew damp and heavy before an impending storm, the charcoal would silently absorb the water vapour, becoming heavier and causing the scale to gently tip downward. When the air was dry, the moisture evaporated and the scale tipped back toward the feathers. It was a weather forecast told entirely through the quiet, physical interaction of earth and air. There is something profoundly soothing about watching a perfectly balanced scale slowly dip, registering a change in the atmosphere that the human skin cannot yet feel. It is a reminder that the world is full of invisible shifts and silent communications, constantly seeking its own perfect, harmonious equilibrium. When that gently balanced scale finally tipped, bringing the rare, heavy rains to the deep desert, the water washed over a city that seemed to be a towering mirage carved from the earth itself, the ancient city of Petra. Hidden deep within the impenetrable winding sandstone canyons of southern Jordan, Petra was the capital of the Nabateans, a nomadic tribe who mastered the harsh desert and controlled the lucrative incense and spice routes bridging Arabia, Egypt, and the Levant. Rather than building their city up from the dusty valley floor using bricks or timber, the Nabateans carved it directly into the towering sheer cliff faces. The stone itself is a mesmerizing, swirling canvas of rose red, rust, and pale orange. But their true genius was not just in their magnificent soaring facades, it was in their mastery of the rain. They carved miles of elegant, sloping terracotta pipes and hidden cisterns deep into the canyon walls, capturing every drop of flash flood water and channeling it into the heart of the city, creating lush, artificial oases in the middle of a barren wasteland. To walk through the narrow winding gorge leading into Petra, and suddenly see a colossal, perfect temple carved from the blushing stone is to witness the absolute triumph of human artistry over an unyielding landscape. As the rare desert rain settles softly into the porous rose-coloured stone, cooling the canyon walls and filling the ancient hidden pools, the world grows deeply, profoundly quiet. The sound of water dripping slowly in a vast echoing chamber becomes a natural metronome, a steady hypnotic pulse that guides you deeper and deeper into a perfectly peaceful, undisturbed rest. In the quiet chambers of Buddhist temples and the secluded studies of Chinese scholars, time was not measured by the echoing splash of water, but by a much softer, drier, and entirely invisible element. They measured the passing hours through the slow, silent burning of the incense clock. These beautiful, meditative devices used a continuous, unbroken trail of finely ground, intensely fragrant powder, often crafted from aged sandalwood, clove, or rare agarwood. This powder was carefully laid out using intricate brass stencils into a sprawling, continuous geometric maze atop a smooth, perfectly flattened bed of white ash. When lit at the very centre, the powder burned at an incredibly steady, predictable, and unhurried rate. The hours of the night were marked not by the sharp ringing of bells, but by subtle, pre-planned changes in the scent drifting through the room. As the glowing ember crossed into a new section of the maze, it might ignite a small pocket of crushed, dried plum blossoms, and then, hours later, a pinch of earthy patchouli. To know the time, you did not need to open your eyes to look at a dial. You simply had to breathe in the atmosphere of the room. It is a brilliant invention that transforms the anxiety of passing time into a beautiful, continuous unfurling of calming fragrance. Before those ancient scholars could sit in the fragrant dark to write their philosophical treatises or trace the movements of the stars, they had to prepare their ink, an act that was in itself a deep, physically grounding meditation. The ink of the Silk Road did not come in a ready-made liquid form. It was preserved as a solid, dark, hardened rectangular stick, masterfully crafted from the delicate soot of burned pine branches, mixed with natural animal glues, and often lightly scented with a drop of musk or camphor. To create the ink, the writer would pour just a few precious drops of pure, clear water onto the smooth, cool, slightly abrasive surface of a carved slate inkstone. Then, holding the dark ink stick perfectly vertically, they would begin to gently grind it against the stone in slow, deliberate, continuous circles. The gentle friction slowly coaxed the dark carbon pigment into the water, transforming it over several minutes into a rich, glossy, profound black liquid. This repetitive circular motion could not be rushed. It naturally forced the scholar to slow their breathing, clear their racing thoughts, and find their absolute centre before a single word was ever put to paper. Notice how the simple thought of that slow, circular motion naturally soothes the mind. The repetitive, effortless glide of the ink on the cool stone mirrors, the gentle, steady rhythm of your own breath, in and out, smooth and continuous. You're safe here, resting deeply in this quiet space where absolutely nothing requires your immediate attention. The body grows pleasantly heavier, melting into the softness beneath you. The profound patience required to grind that ink pales in comparison to the creation of another breathtaking luxury that moved slowly along the eastern routes, demanding a near impossible level of dedication: carved lacquerware. True lacquer is born from the toxic sap of the Toxicodendron venicifluum tree. When carefully harvested and purified, this thick sap becomes a natural, incredibly durable waterproof resin. But the magic lies entirely in the excruciatingly slow application. Artisans would coat a thin wooden bowl with a microthin layer of liquid lacquer, then place it in a specialized, darkened, highly humid room to cure. Only when that single layer was completely dry and polished could they apply the next. To create the deeply carved, brilliant cinnabar red vessels prized by emperors and wealthy merchants, an artisan might apply over 100 separate transparent layers of sap. This process alone could take several years to finish a single small plate. When finally complete, the accumulated layers were thick enough to be carved into intricate, sweeping, three-dimensional landscapes of mountain peaks, twisting pines, and hovering clouds. To hold a piece of carved lacquer is to hold materialized time, a physical manifestation of unwavering daily dedication, built up slowly, layer by invisible layer, until it forms a masterpiece. Moving far from the humid, dark, curing rooms of the East, we travel into the scorching, arid oases of Mesopotamia and the Arabian Peninsula, where we find a completely different kind of slow, miraculous accumulation, the ripening of the date palm. Known in ancient texts as the Tree of Life, the tall, elegant date palm was the absolute unshakable anchor of desert survival. Rising up to 80 feet into the blinding white-hot sky, its massive, feathery fronds created a vital, protective canopy of deep shade, cooling the desert floor just enough to allow fragile crops like figs and pomegranates to grow in the soil beneath it. But its greatest gift hung in massive, heavy, golden clusters just below the leaves: the date fruit. These small, oblong fruits were essentially natural, sun-baked candies, packed with an incredibly dense concentration of complex sugars, essential fibre, and potassium. A single handful of dried dates could sustain a weary traveller for days across the most desolate, waterless stretches of sand. When bitten into, the thick flesh was sticky, rich, and deeply caramelized, tasting of dark honey, brown sugar, and warm earth. It is a deeply comforting realization that nature provided such an intensely sweet, perfect source of enduring energy in a landscape that otherwise seemed so barren and entirely unforgiving. If the heavy dates provided the dense, sweet endurance needed for the long journey, a small, vibrant green pod from the damp, shaded, monsoon-soaked forests of the Cardamom Mountains in India provided the bright, awakening spark that fueled the evening camps. Cardamom. Universally known as the Queen of Spices, it grew quietly on tall, leafy, herbaceous plants that thrived under the thick, protective canopy of the jungle. When harvesters gently split open the pale green, papery, triangular shell of the pod, they revealed a tight, sticky cluster of tiny, dark seeds. These small seeds held an explosively aromatic oil that defied easy description, a complex, soaring, almost cooling blend of sharp mint, bright citrus, and warm pine needle. Along the desert routes, Arab merchants would drop a single, lightly crushed cardamom pod into the long, curved spouts of their brass coffee pots, resting in the hot embers of the fire. As the dark, bitter liquid poured over the cracked green shell, the intense heat released the volatile oils, instantly transforming the coffee into a deeply fragrant, luxurious, and restorative elixir. It is a beautiful example of how something incredibly small, hiding quietly within a delicate outer shell, possesses the profound power to completely change the atmosphere of an entire room. Like that small seed opening in the warmth of the fire, allow yourself to soften and open to the deep comfort of the night. There is no need to guard your thoughts or hold your muscles tight. The long, demanding day is entirely over, the journey is resting, and you are surrounded by a deep, protective, unshakable quiet. Let the mind simply drift through these fragrant ancient valleys. The complex, interlocking aromas of crushed cardamom and dark coffee often drifted over the vibrant, highly textured surfaces of a craft that literally defined the interior warmth of the nomadic world. The hand-tied carpet. While we might view a rug today as a simple, mass-produced floor covering, the carpets woven in Persia, Anatolia, and the high Caucasus Mountains were sprawling, portable, woven gardens made of spun wool and silk. The creation of these carpets was a hypnotic, deeply rhythmic, and almost musical process. A master weaver sat before a large vertical wooden loom, their calloused fingers moving with a practiced speed that blurred to the naked eye. They did not weave in the traditional sense. They tied individual microscopic knots of brightly dyed wool around the vertical tensioned warp threads. A high-quality silk rug might contain over 1,000 individual knots in a single square inch. Millions of tiny, deliberate knots, tied one by one over many months or even years, coming together to form a breathtaking, unified field of blooming lotuses, twisting vines, and geometric stars. It reminds us that any grand, sprawling, complex masterpiece is ultimately just the sum of thousands of small, simple, quiet movements, repeated over and over with absolute care. The soft, sound-absorbing wool of those heavy, beautiful carpets provided the perfect, yielding resting place for objects of striking, luminous metal. While heavy gold was hoarded in the dark vaults of kings, silver was the true, flowing currency of the Silk Road. And no one worked silver quite like the brilliant artisans of the Sasanian Empire and the Sogdian city-states. They mastered a breathtaking technique known as repoussé. Instead of carving or cutting into the surface of a silver bowl or jug, the silversmith would take a smooth, flat sheet of the precious metal and place it face down over a bed of yielding warm pitch or tree resin. Then, working entirely from the reverse side of the metal, they would use smooth, rounded hammers to gently, persistently push the silver outward. With thousands of soft, rhythmic taps, They coax the metal into deep, glowing, three-dimensional reliefs of galloping horses, resting lions, and lush, twisting grapevines. The image bloomed upward, pushed from the darkness behind the surface into the light. It is a magnificent, quiet metaphor for inner strength. The most beautiful, shining, and prominent details of our lives are often formed not by cutting pieces of ourselves away, but by the gentle, persistent, invisible pressure we apply from within. This outward push of glowing, precious material finds a stunning, entirely natural equivalent deep within the rugged, dusty foothills of the Salt Range in the Punjab region. According to historical legend, when Alexander the Great's massive world-conquering army paused its eastern march to rest in this area, the soldiers noticed their weary, battle-hardened horses instinctively licking the rocks protruding from the earth. The animals had discovered the Cura salt mine, one of the largest and oldest underground salt deposits on the planet. But this was not the stark, blinding white salt of the open desert basins. Due to trace amounts of iron oxide trapped within the ancient, evaporated seabeds millions of years ago, the salt crystals here formed in breathtaking, translucent bands of pale peach, warm orange, and deep, blushing rose. When ancient miners carefully extracted these massive, heavy slabs of pink salt and placed a flickering, oil-soaked wick behind them, the raw rock glowed with a warm, diffuse, deeply soothing amber light. The harsh, unforgiving ancient mineral was instantly transformed into a radiant, comforting hearth, pushing back the heavy darkness of the subterranean caves. Imagine that soft, warm, amber light gently illuminating the quiet space around you right now. It casts no harsh shadows, demanding absolutely nothing of your tired eyes. It simply glows with a steady, ancient, protective warmth. Let that same peaceful warmth spread slowly down through your shoulders, flowing into your arms and all the way to your fingertips, leaving you feeling perfectly heavy and completely, profoundly relaxed. The warm, amber glow of the salt lamp might have illuminated a deeply meditative ceremony occurring in the tea houses of the Song dynasty, a ritual that elevated a simple daily drink into an art form of exquisite, breathtaking precision. Long before tea was commonly steeped in hot water using loose leaves, the absolute finest spring harvest was steamed, dried, and ground into a vibrant, microfine powder in heavy stone mills. This was the brilliant ancestor of modern matcha. In a quiet, highly focused ritual, a small wooden scoop of this vivid jade green powder was placed into the bottom of a wide, heavy ceramic bowl. Just boiling water was poured over the powder, and then, using a delicate, intricately carved whisk made from a single piece of split bamboo, the tea was rapidly whipped. The artisan's wrist moved in a fast, fluid, mesmerizing zigzag motion, aerating the hot liquid until a thick, creamy, pale green froth formed perfectly on the surface. The resulting beverage was incredibly rich, earthy, and complex. But the true value of the ceremony lay in the profound focus required to create it. It was a practice of absolute mindfulness, demanding that the creator be entirely present in the sound of the bamboo whisk against the clay, the smell of the rising steam, and the perfect, fleeting, beautiful consistency of the foam. The deep, earthy, vibrant green of that whipped tea is mirrored by the needles of a living, breathing monument that has stood as a silent, unwavering witness to the entire sprawling history of the Silk Road. In the central Iranian plateau, rooted deeply and stubbornly in the dry, dusty earth of the Yazd province, stands the cypress of Abaku. This colossal, evergreen Mediterranean cypress is estimated by botanists to be over 4,000 years old. It was a tiny, fragile sapling when the Great Pyramids of Egypt were young, and it was already considered ancient when the very first caravans of silk and jade passed by its immense shade. In the ancient Zoroastrian faith, the evergreen cypress is a profoundly sacred symbol of eternal life, a soul that never loses its vibrant colour, even in the dead, freezing depths of winter. To stand beneath the massive twisting branches of this tree, feeling the rough, deeply furrowed bark that has quietly weathered 4 millennia of scorching desert summers and freezing mountain nights, is to feel the true, unimaginable weight of time. The tree does not rush. It does not worry about the empires that violently rise and quietly fall around it. It simply breathes, reaching its thick roots deeper into the earth, standing as a quiet, unshakable living anchor in a constantly shifting world. As you imagine resting your back against the solid, ancient trunk of that eternal tree, feeling the slow, deep, reliable pulse of the earth beneath you, the last lingering remnants of the day's urgency simply slip away into the dark, welcoming soil. The stars begin to emerge, shining clearly and steadily through the dark evergreen branches, pulling us gently and safely onward into the quiet, undiscovered depths of the unfolding night. Through those dark, evergreen branches of the ancient cypress, the wind carries a sound that seems entirely out of place in the dry, sheltered rooms of early Chinese farming villages. If you were to stand quietly in the dim light of one of these wooden rearing houses during the spring, you would hear what sounds exactly like a gentle, steady rain shower falling upon a broad-leafed forest. It is a rhythmic, hushed, endlessly soothing static. Yet, there are no clouds in the sky, and not a single drop of water is falling to the earth. This mesmerizing acoustic illusion is created by the synchronized movement of tens of thousands of tiny jaws. It is the sound of silkworms feeding on fresh, green mulberry leaves. To cultivate the silk that bound the ancient world together, caretakers had to maintain an environment of absolute tranquility. The worms were highly sensitive to sudden noises, drafts, or harsh odours. The caretakers moved through the room with slow, deliberate grace, laying down fresh beds of leaves in near total silence. The continuous soft rustling of the feeding is a magnificent lullaby of accumulation, a reminder that the grandest, most luxurious fabrics in human history began with a quiet, collective sound of nourishment in a peaceful, shadowed room. This incredibly delicate acoustic vibration, so small it barely registers as more than a whisper, stands in profound contrast to a masterpiece of ancient engineering designed to listen for the deepest, most terrifying vibrations of the earth itself. In the 2nd century, the brilliant polymath Zhang Heng cast the world's first seismoscope from solid bronze. It was an object of staggering heavy beauty, a massive domed bronze jar measuring nearly 6 feet across. Cast around the outside of the vessel were 8 intricate dragons, facing downward toward the 8 points of the compass. Resting quietly in the mouth of each dragon was a single heavy bronze ball. Directly below each dragon sat a bronze toad with its mouth wide open, looking up in eternal anticipation. Hidden entirely within the sealed jar was a hypersensitive pendulum. If an earthquake occurred hundreds of miles away, so far that no human could possibly feel the ground move, the invisible seismic wave would travel through the earth, gently tip the pendulum, and trigger a hidden lever. A single dragon would silently open its jaws, and the bronze ball would drop with a sharp, echoing clang into the waiting mouth of the toad below. It was a flawless marriage of art and physics, a heavy, silent guardian waiting with infinite patience to translate the invisible shifting of the world into a single, clarifying sound. Notice how deeply your own body mirrors this heavy, waiting stillness. The Earth may shift and turn in its massive orbit. The world outside may continue its complex movements, but your immediate space is entirely secure. The muscles of your back and shoulders are grounded, sinking heavily and comfortably. You do not need to react. You can simply rest in the quiet center of the room, completely unbothered by the distant echoes of the day. From the monumental weight of that cast bronze vessel, we shift to an object so small and weightless it could be carried in the fold of a sleeve, yet its geometric perfection rivals the finest metalwork, the star anise. Native to the damp, evergreen forests of southern China and northern Vietnam, This exquisite spice does not look like a seed pod, but rather like a tiny, perfectly carved wooden star, typically possessing 8 symmetrical points. As the pods dried in the hot sun, they hardened into a rich, deep mahogany brown, locking within them an incredibly potent volatile oil. When a merchant opened a small pouch of star anise, the air was instantly filled with a warm, sweet, intensely aromatic scent of black licorice and rich earth. It was a primary ingredient in the famous 5-spice powder, a culinary philosophy that sought to perfectly balance the fundamental flavours of the universe: sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami. To hold a star anise is to hold a microscopic piece of architectural perfection, a tiny compass rose formed entirely by nature, offering a warm, soothing fragrance that settles the stomach and calms the breathing. The warm, earthy amber hue of the dried star anise perfectly matched one of the 3 signature colours of a ceramic tradition that captured the vibrant cosmopolitan spirit of the Silk Road like no other. This was the Sankai, or 3-colour glaze of the Tang dynasty. Artisans created breathtakingly lifelike clay figures of soaring falcons, fierce guardian spirits, and most famously, the magnificent Bactrian camels that carried their world. Before firing, the pale clay was coated in a lead-based glaze coloured with copper and iron oxides. When subjected to the roaring, transformative heat of the kiln, something magical happened. The glazes melted into a fluid liquid glass, and the colours, typically a deep spinach green, a rich amber brown and a creamy translucent white, would gently run and bleed into one another. The result was a soft, mottled watercolour effect permanently frozen over the curves of the sculpture. The rigid lines of the clay were softened by the organic, unpredictable flow of the melting glass. It teaches a beautiful lesson about letting go of absolute control. The artisan applied the colours, but they had to trust the intense heat of the kiln to blend them into a masterpiece of soft, harmonious transitions. The intense, roaring heat of those ceramic kilns was often fueled by a botanical giant that defined the landscape of the East, a plant that is technically a grass but grows with the towering strength of a great timber forest: bamboo. In the misty, sprawling valleys of Sichuan, entire mountainsides were carpeted in these towering, segmented green stalks. Bamboo was the supreme material of the ancient journey, used to build the woven suspension bridges that spanned terrifying gorges, the sturdy masts of trading ships, and the delicate shaved slips upon which the earliest books were written. But the true philosophical power of bamboo lies in its physical structure. The stalk is entirely hollow inside, and it grows in perfectly spaced segments that provide incredible flexibility. When a sudden, violent winter snowstorm sweeps through the valley, the heavy snow accumulates on the leaves, forcing the tall bamboo to bend completely in half, its tip touching the freezing earth. A rigid oak tree would snap under such immense, crushing weight, but the bamboo simply yields. It bows to the pressure, resting in the snow. When the morning sun finally melts the ice, the bamboo springs effortlessly back to its full, towering height, completely unharmed. Just like that hollow, flexible reed, you can let your own mind bend and sway with the passing thoughts of the night without ever snapping. You do not need to fight the weight of your own fatigue, simply yield to it. Let the heaviness press you gently downward into sleep, knowing that you will naturally, effortlessly spring back to life when the morning sun returns. The mature, hollow stalks of the bamboo were often meticulously carved into smooth, round bowls, designed to hold the pieces of the oldest continuously played board game in human history, the game of Go, known in ancient China as Weiqi. Unlike the rigid hierarchical movements of chess, where pieces clash to capture a king, the game of Go begins with a completely empty wooden grid of 19 intersecting vertical and horizontal lines. 2 players sit in absolute silence. One holds a bowl of smooth black slate stones, the other holds a bowl of white clamshell stones. One by one, they take turns placing a single stone onto the intersections of the board. The goal is not destruction. but the quiet, strategic surrounding and claiming of empty space. The acoustic rhythm of the game is deeply hypnotic. The soft rustle of a hand reaching into the bowl, followed by the sharp, satisfying clack of a cool stone being pressed firmly onto the warm wood of the board. As the black and white stones slowly fill the empty grid, they begin to resemble a sprawling, complex constellation of stars mapping the universe. It is a game of profound patience, teaching us that true mastery is often found not in aggressive movement, but in the thoughtful, deliberate placement of ourselves within the vast spaces of our lives. The precise geometric grid of the wooden go board finds a wild, vibrant and completely unstructured counterpart in the flowing textiles woven by the women of Central Asia. This is the art of Suzani. Moving across the dusty, sun-bleached landscapes of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, the nomadic and settled families craved the lush greenery of the spring. To carry the memory of the garden with them through the bleak, freezing winters, they painted with thread. Using a simple tambour hook or a fine needle, artisans embroidered massive, sprawling panels of heavy cotton or silk with vibrant dyed silk threads. They did not use rigid straight lines. Instead, the Suzani panels exploded with massive circular crimson carnations, curling green vines, deep blue irises, and the bright ruby-red seeds of the pomegranate. These massive embroidered cloths were used to drape the interior walls of yurts or to cover the resting beds of the family, transforming a simple dark room into a blooming eternal garden. The meticulous rhythmic pulling of the silk thread through the heavy cotton was a daily meditation, a way to stitch warmth, colour, and life into a fabric that would shelter the next generation from the cold. The meticulous needlepoint focus of the Suzani embroiderer was mirrored by the single-hair brush of the illuminator, working quietly in the scriptoriums and libraries along the western edges of the Silk Road. As ancient texts of philosophy, medicine, and poetry were copied by hand onto heavy, smooth vellum, master artists were tasked with bringing the margins to life. This was the breathtaking art of the illuminated manuscript. Using an agonizingly slow, precise technique, the artist would crush pure gold leaf into a fine powder, mixing it with glaire, the clear sticky liquid of an egg white, to create an ink of pure liquid light. With a brush sometimes consisting of only 3 fine squirrel hairs, they would paint intricate twisting vines, tiny songbirds, and elaborate geometric borders around the dark calligraphy of the text. They would then use a smooth, polished dog's tooth or a piece of hard agate to burnish the dried gold, pressing it until it gleamed with a brilliant mirror-like finish against the page. When the heavy leather cover of the book was opened in the dim light of a candle, the crushed gold would instantly catch the flame, causing the very edges of the page to spark and glow. The devotion required to paint a masterpiece that is only an inch wide, hidden inside a book that may only be opened once a year, is a beautiful testament to the belief that absolute perfection is worth creating simply for its own sake. Painted within those glowing golden margins of the East, one would often find the elegant curving petals of a flower that defined the quiet endurance of the changing seasons, the chrysanthemum. While most flowers rush to bloom in the warm, easy days of spring and summer, competing for the light, the chrysanthemum waits. It gathers its strength slowly through the hottest months, remaining a simple, unremarkable green bush. It is only when the autumn arrives, when the air turns biting and cold and the other flowers wither and fade, that the chrysanthemum finally opens its hundreds of tightly layered slender petals. Ranging in colour from deep, rust red to a brilliant sun-drenched yellow, the flower was revered by ancient scholars as a symbol of nobility, resilience, and quiet grace under hardship. Because it bloomed in the 9th lunar month, it became eternally associated with longevity and the ability to gracefully withstand the freezing frost. To drink a pale, golden tea steeped from its dried petals was thought to bring the drinker the same calm, unhurried strength. It is a comforting botanical reminder that you do not need to bloom on the same schedule as everything else. There is a profound, lasting beauty in waiting for your own proper season, taking the time you need to gather your strength before opening to the world. While the golden petals of the chrysanthemum eventually yield to the deep snows of winter, the walls built by human hands to seek shelter from those extremes often outlast the empires that ordered their construction. Deep in the Tarim Basin, the ancient labyrinthine alleys of Kashgar's old city were a masterclass in elemental survival. This was not a city of wide, straight sweeping boulevards. It was an organic, tightly woven maze of mud brick walls, deliberately designed to confuse the howling desert winds and provide maximum continuous shade. The streets were so narrow in places that a heavily laden camel could barely pass, and the multi-story clay homes leaned inward toward each other, occasionally meeting at the top to form cool, dark, arched tunnels. To walk through this winding, earth-toned labyrinth was to experience a profound shift in temperature and sound. The blinding glare and the roar of the desert wind were instantly reduced to a soft, cool, muted quiet. Getting lost in these winding alleys was not a source of panic, but a gentle surrender to the architecture. Every twisting turn eventually led to a heavy wooden door, and behind that door lay a quiet, sunlit inner courtyard, a private sanctuary of peace hidden entirely from the chaotic world outside. The winding paths of the day have finally led you to this quiet courtyard of rest. You have navigated the complex maze of the waking world, and now you have arrived perfectly at the centre. The heavy doors are closed. The dust of the road is settling. You're surrounded by tall, thick, protective walls of silence, allowing you to breathe deeply and sink completely into the tranquil, undisturbed sanctuary of the night. As the deep, cooling shadows of the Kashgar courtyard stretch toward the evening, we reach the final wonder of this long, winding road, a secret not found in the weight of gold or the shimmer of silk, but in the very air itself. High in the remote, mist-shrouded valleys of the eastern Himalayas, there exists a tree known as the Cercidophyllum, or the Katsura tree. While many plants on the Silk Road were traded for their wood or fruit, the Katsura was prized for a phenomenon that only occurs when its heart-shaped leaves begin to fade. In the autumn, as the green leaves wither and fall to the damp earth, they undergo a chemical transformation that releases a scent unlike any other in nature, a fragrance that smells exactly like warm, caramelized sugar and toasted cinnamon. Travellers walking through these high, silent groves would find themselves enveloped in the invisible scent of a celestial bakery, a sweetness that seemed to rise from the ground itself as the tree returned its life to the soil. To the ancient mind, this was the ultimate sign of a benevolent universe. Even in the act of falling, even in the moment of letting go, the tree offered a final, lingering gift of sweetness to the world. It is a profound, grounding truth that completion is not a loss, but a transition into a different kind of beauty. Like the Katsura leaf, we have gathered our experiences, we have travelled the long miles, and now we arrive at the moment where the most beautiful thing we can do is simply let go, trusting the earth to catch us and the air to carry our rest. The journey of 101 wonders has reached its final sanctuary. The heavy wooden gates of the caravanserais have swung shut, and the bronze bolts have been slid into place. The long, dusty miles of the Silk Road, the high mountain passes, the singing dunes, the vibrant markets, and the silent observatories are all behind you now. They have served their purpose. They have carried your mind across continents and centuries, and now they are beginning to soften and dissolve into a warm, featureless mist. You do not need to remember the name of a single city. You do not need to recall the texture of the silk or the scent of the spices. Every fact you have heard is like a single grain of sand, settling quietly at the bottom of a still, deep pool. The water is clear. The water is calm. Feel the profound weight of this completion. Your body is a vessel that has safely reached its harbour. The muscles of your feet, which walk the high steps in your imagination, are now completely still. The muscles of your hands, which touch the cool jade and the warm spices, are now entirely open and relaxed. Every breath you take is a slow, rhythmic tide, pulling you further away from the shore of the waking world. The room is a cocoon of absolute safety. The darkness is a soft, heavy blanket shielding you from any remaining flicker of the day's urgency. There is no more road to follow. There are no more horizons to seek. The stories have done their work. They have woven a protective tapestry around your mind, and now the threads are loosening, becoming light and airy. You are drifting in the quiet space between the stars where there is no sound but the gentle, steady echo of your own peace. Everything is finished. Everything is well. You are permitted to stop listening. You are permitted to let the silence take over. The journey is over and the rest has begun. Sink down, deeper now, further into the warmth, further into the dark, and now 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.